Chapter 181, Dobby's Memories. Snape smacked his lips, noting that the headmaster was still unwilling to reveal that Harry could speak Parseltongue. Perhaps Dumbledore wanted to avoid anyone linking it to Lord Voldemort or the Gaunt family. Snape cleared his throat and went on. According to Slytherin's final words, the basilisk only attacks witches and wizards of Muggle lineage. Mr. Harry Potter is a half-blood wizard. Dobby, the basilisk won't harm him, someone countered. After all, the wizard who opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago was also a half-blood. Voices rose immediately. Excuse me, why wouldn't the basilisk harm Harry? Can it distinguish between wizards? It doesn't. The one who summons and controls it does. Dobby fell silent at that. What he feared most was not the basilisk itself. But Dobby doesn't think so, he protested. If the diary returns to the school, Mr. Harry Potter will be in mortal danger. Oh, Snape raised an eyebrow. So you know something about the diary? Otherwise, why would Dobby think the Savior is in a life-or-death crisis at Hogwarts under Headmaster Dumbledore's care? Dobby. The house elf stammered, too frightened to say more. Snape, you can't pressure Dobby like that. Harry stepped forward to protect him. Mr. Potter, I'm not pressuring him. I'm asking for the truth. Snape shook his head. If he accuses a wizard, he must tell the whole story. Dobby, tell us plainly, do you know what's in the diary? Do you know it better than Lucius Malfoy? Snape's tone was quiet but sharp. His gaze was cold and dangerous. Hearing the name made Dobby tremble all over. He remembered the man and his face. Snape leaned in, continuing. You must have overheard something that made you fear the diary's return to Hogwarts. That's why you tried to stop Harry from going back to school. Do you know that the diary is one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes? That the first thing he'd do if he returned would be to kill Harry Potter? Dobby's fear deepened. He opened his mouth, but words failed him. When Snape actually spoke, you know whose name aloud, the wizards gathered in the square gasped. He called him by name? Did I hear that right? How dare he? No one had ever uttered Lord Voldemort's name so plainly in public like that. Conversation rippled. That's not the point, one wizard muttered, then quieter. Didn't he just say the diary is a Horcrux? Horcrux. Yes, a vile dark art, splitting the soul to anchor oneself to life. Then doesn't that mean? A witch went pale, her voice trailing off. You know who could come back through the diary. Her eyes kept flicking to the little book on the podium. The murmurs deepened. Everyone's faces hardened as the meaning sank in. Horcruxes were terrible, and the idea of one at Hogwarts sent shocks through the crowd. Oh, Merlin, this must be some sort of nightmare. Panic and confusion spread. People jostled and whispered, trying to piece together the terrifying implications. Lucius Malfoy, meanwhile, let out a quiet sigh of relief. The attention had shifted away from him. Suspicion that he had tried to harm Harry was evaporating. By pointing to a greater danger, a bigger scandal, Snape had pulled focus away from Lucius. The Malfoys' eyes turned to Snape with gratitude. Without Snape's intervention, they would have been ruined. Now, they could hope to wrangle a manageable consequence. They also looked at Dobby with hatred and disgust. How could a house elf, who knew what was in that diary, not tell his own master? Worse, how could he betray the Malfoys? Lucius took a steadying breath. After the trial, he vowed he would take Dobby back and punish him, make an example of him. Dobby's betrayal had cost Malfoy dignity and reputation. If any punishment for privately possessing a dark object was necessary, so be it. It was preferable to public damnation. Dobby shrank as soon as he heard the name Lord Voldemort. He remembered those unbearable days when Lucius had been a Death Eater and when Voldemort himself had once come to Malfoy Manor. The very air had felt suffocating in the man's presence. Dobby had seen Voldemort hand Lucius a diary. The man was robed in black, his face terrifying, his snake-like eyes seeming to drink the light from the room. He had slipped quietly into Malfoy Manor without his usual throng of Death Eaters and summoned Lucius alone. Neither had noticed Dobby crouching in a corner, scrubbing the floor. Lucius. Voldemort's voice had been a cold wind that made Lucius tremble. Today, I will reward you. Lucius had immediately knelt, quivering with submission. It is my honor to serve you, my master. Voldemort had smiled, satisfied. From the fold of his cloak, he had taken out a diary. This diary, he whispered, is a dark arts work from my school days. It contains parts of my memories. You can speak to it." Lucius had taken it with shaking hands, treating it like a reliquary. He understood that it was not merely a reward, but an instruction. "What should I do with it, master?" "Keep it to yourself. Let no one know of its existence." Voldemort watched Lucius leave, chuckling. "When the diary takes hold of someone's mind, I will have a second life." Voldemort touched the space where his nose was missing. When he saw Dobby cowering, he had thrown a Cruciatus curse at the house elf. The memory of pain made Dobby convulse again. Dobby. Harry's soft reminder brought the house elf back to the present. Snape was laying out the truth plainly. "It seems you knew enough that, when you learned the diary might be returning to Hogwarts, you were desperate to stop Harry." "Alas, Dobby," Snape said, shaking his head, a look of disappointment on his face. "Why didn't you tell your master about something so important? Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Dobby cannot speak of master's affairs." "But you already have." "Because master wanted to harm Harry," Dobby whispered. "Though he is Dobby's master, Dobby must protect Harry Potter." A hush fell. Even a house elf had loyalties beyond the one imposed by servitude. Hearing that Lucius would harm Harry, Dobby had chosen to act. "Enemy?" Snape laughed bitterly. "When can a house elf have his own will?" "Snape," Dumbledore's voice cut through sharply. "Professor, please allow me to finish." Snape turned back to Dobby. "By the terms of your service," he pressed, "you gain your freedom only when a wizard gives you clothes. Until then, you are your master's servant. His will is your creed. I sympathize with what you have suffered, but your betrayal—" Snape glanced at Harry, then returned to Dobby. "Your betrayal of Malfoy will make all house elves untrusted. After this trial, countless house elves could suffer because of you." Dobby lifted his head, trembling. He looked at Harry, then bowed his head and began to walk away. Harry noticed Dobby seemed off and opened his mouth to call after him. But before he could, an incredible scene unfolded before him. Dobby's eyes shone with a terrible calm, like a single steady light before it dies. For Harry, for the house elves, for the wizarding world, it plunged its hand into its own chest. Gray clouds drifted across the sky, and the valley wind stirred the grass. The pale sun hung overhead, casting a bone-white light that showed every line of Dobby's face and the scorch on its chest. A burning pain ripped through its body. It trembled, but would not give way. Teeth clenched against the agony, Dobby pulled its heart out, a small, fiery thing clutched in a blood-slick hand like a wounded jewel. The hand tightened around it as if its grip could tell a long, tragic story. Dobby understood what it had done. By turning against its master, it had forfeited the right to be regarded as before. Yet to lift the darkness that hung over so many, it was willing to offer its heart back to Malfoy. If Harry could live, if other house elves might be spared more suffering, then this sacrifice was worth it. It stepped forward, bleeding, each pace a fresh effort. The blood from its chest flowed like a ribbon down its robes, but it did not fall. It kept moving toward Lucius Malfoy. The crowd was silent, the world seeming to hold its breath. Some children hid their faces. A few older witches and wizards had tears glinting in their eyes. Dobby's small, determined figure left a mark on everyone there, one tiny life standing braver than many towering heroes. Lucius Malfoy recoiled as the wounded house elf approached, several steps stumbling backward. Dobby did not reach him. Its breath failed, it collapsed before him, and the heart slipped from its hand as the body fell. It rolled across the dust and came to rest at Lucius's feet. "Dobby," Harry cried, rushing forward. He knelt and gathered the limp body against him, his face racked with grief. Dobby's mouth was stained with blood, but there was a faint, satisfied calm on its pale face, as though it was telling Harry that things would be all right. Lucius looked down at the small, beating token at his feet and felt a strange constriction in his chest. He was a Malfoy, pure blood, proud, and he had no sympathy for what he had always called a lowly house elf. This creature had betrayed him. Even if it hadn't torn out its heart, the punishment at home would have been severe. Yet now the sight of that little heart made something twist in him. He sneered and lifted his foot, intending to crush it. A subtle force held him back. He turned and found the source of the magic, Rogge, who had been standing nearby, his face composed. "Mr. Lucius," Rogge said quietly, "Dobby is begging you for forgiveness. It had no choice but to help Potter, and now to preserve the honor of a house elf, it offers you its heart. Rogge had thought, at first, that Dobby's self-harm was a desperate way to break the binding of servitude. But as he watched, he realized the meaning of the deed was not just about ritual law, it was what others would make of it. This was a demonstration, a last appeal that could not be ignored. As a wizard, when confronting the dead, especially a house elf, there was a need to show breadth of spirit. Rogge breathed deeply and let that consideration guide him. Lucius's expression shifted with bewildering speed, from contempt to sorrow, as if painting on a new face. He stooped and with shaking hands picked the little heart up. "Dobby," he whispered, the voice that had been cold and proud moments before now cracked with grief. "This is a tragedy. I never meant to kill you." He bowed his head, and a tear, reluctant at first, escaped and dropped to the ground. "Dobby, if only you would come back, I would forgive you." The sudden display of agony from the notorious Lucius Malfoy moved many of the onlookers. Sympathy rippled through the crowd. This haughty lord who had seemed invulnerable now looked small and lost. People murmured to one another about the devoted house elf who had died so nobly. For a moment, attention shifted to the house elves who had long been taken for granted. "We should rethink the way house elves are treated," someone said, and the idea caught hold. Voices rose around the square. "Yes, of course. They have lives and feelings and deserve respect. If we treat them better, perhaps these tragedies won't happen." Dumbledore stood above them all, watching with a grave face. He understood the moment for what it was. "Perhaps this is the time to reevaluate the place of house elves among us," he said slowly. "They are sentient, with emotions. They deserve more consideration and care." "Agreed. Yes," came the replies, as support swelled. Sensing that the tide had turned, Dumbledore suggested, "We might consider raising their standing and even offering a form of pay to acknowledge their service." At the mention of wages, many in the crowd fell silent and uneasy. The idea of paying servants was alien to families who had never had to think of house elves as anything but property. Still, the mood had changed enough that few were willing to voice outright opposition. They exchanged furtive looks, each hoping someone braver would speak. Rogge was the first to rise in that hush. "I support it," he said. His endorsement, however, was not entirely idealistic. To him, granting house elves a salary might simply dress up the old system. The money could be used as another instrument of control. Masters could deduct for the smallest infraction, dishes not perfectly clean, a mended robe, an awkward entrance, and the salary would simply circulate back to them. It would be a contract in name only, leaving the essential dependency unchanged. Even so, to have a change acknowledged in law or custom would be a step forward. He glanced once at Dobby's still form and let a thin, almost inaudible sigh escape. Hoping that wizards will save the house elves, Rogge thought, was perhaps a naive hope. But for now, in the hush that followed Dobby's sacrifice, the possibility of change lingered in the air. Chapter 183, Lady Longbottom's Question. When Travis raised his hand, Lucius quickly followed. The Malfoy household had only ever kept 2 house elves. With Dobby dead, only one remained. Their wages were a few nuts, barely enough for a single family meal. Seeing the Malfoys and Travis so ready to accept Dumbledore's proposal encouraged other pureblood wizards to do the same, and hands began to go up around the square. Minister Fudge hurried forward, palm over his stomach, as if claiming credit. "I'm very pleased to see everyone reconsidering the status of house elves and agreeing that they should receive reasonable compensation for their work." He turned to Dumbledore. "I'll urge the ministry to draft the necessary laws as soon as possible to protect the rights of our little elves in the wizarding world. Albus, what do you think?" "Of course," Dumbledore said, nodding. Dobby's death had saddened him, but the broad support for reform was a relief. It proved that wizarding society could change when the moment demanded it. Harry held Dobby's limp body close, Dobby's tunic darkened with blood. His face was raw with grief as he looked to Dumbledore and asked quietly, "Professor, can we give Dobby a funeral?" He wanted to say goodbye to the brave little elf who had protected him, to show respect and to remember. Dumbledore's eyes were kind. He knelt, laid a hand on Dobby, then looked back to Harry with gentle concern. "Of course, Harry, we will give Dobby a funeral." With that, Dumbledore broke a small willow branch and, with a flick of his wand, shaped it into a delicate coffin. Harry wiped his eyes and placed Dobby inside. Dumbledore patted his shoulder. Dobby was brave. His sacrifice will be remembered. This is our tribute, and it represents the respect of all wizards for house elves. Dumbledore's words warmed Harry a little, giving him comfort amid his sorrow. For a moment he felt clearer about how important a fair, equal wizarding world could be. Dobby's sacrifice, he decided, must become a beacon. Then his anger flared. He turned and met Travis's careless smile and felt bile rise. If Travis had not coerced Dobby, the elf might still be alive. If Travis had not wriggled free of responsibility, Lucius might not have done the same. Harry's gaze hardened. How could anyone be so cold? Had Dobby's courage moved no part of him? Were Slytherins simply like that, he wondered? Was Travis born cruel? Damn little Death Eater, Ron muttered under his breath. The curse echoed Harry's own feeling. Travis felt the sting and glanced over. He only smiled, unmoved. If Dumbledore and Harry stood for equality, he stood where power decided right. He believed in might and tradition, an old, ugly creed that mattered to him more than any sentimental appeal. Headmaster, Travis said smoothly, looking past Dumbledore to the object at the center of the square, I think we should judge the true protagonist of today. He meant the diary. The remark chilled the crowd. Some of them clutched their wands a little tighter at the thought. If the diary was a Horcrux, if Tom Riddle's fragment could still reach through, what then? Are we really going to judge him? That's you-know-who, someone whispered. Will he come back? Another asked. I don't know, said a woman, voice trembling. I'm taking every dark artifact out of my house when I get home. Dumbledore raised a hand and the murmurs subsided. He placed the diary in the center of the square and sent a breath of magic through it. The book hovered, its faded cover open and exposed. Riddle, Dumbledore said, 50 years ago released a basilisk that murdered Myrtle Elizabeth Warren. At his words, Myrtle rose up from where she had been buried, her face, usually tearful, lit now with the peculiar joy of a long, silent witness invited to a reckoning. She floated forward, eager to see the one who had killed her answer to judgment. Madame Norris and Mr. Filch were petrified by the basilisk, Dumbledore continued. Filch shuffled forward with Madame Norris clutched under one arm, looking awkward and oddly proud, while Colin Creevey hovered at the edge of the crowd, camera at the ready. And Ron Weasley, Dumbledore's voice softened, and he looked toward Molly, was harmed by Tom's handiwork and, to this day, remains under care in the hospital wing. A cry rang out from the crowd. An older woman in a green robe and a fox fur scarf had pushed her way to the front, Neville's grandmother, Mrs. Longbottom. Her step was sure, her eyes fixed on Dumbledore with an intensity that quieted the square entirely. Those who knew her knew she was not a woman to be trifled with. Her son and daughter-in-law had been captured and brutally tortured by Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall. Neville's parents, members of the Order of the Phoenix, lay still at St. Mungo's, their minds shattered. Mrs. Longbottom had every right to demand something more. Albus, she said, voice sharp, you know that was Lord Voldemort. Many of our kin died by his hand. She pointed at the diary as if it were the man himself. Do you think that's all his crimes amount to? I didn't come here to judge him for releasing a basilisk that petrified a few people. I want a full accounting. I want his monsterhood exposed. Her tone hardened, and she gestured as if shoving the culprit into a basin. If that's his only Horcrux, judge him once. If there's a second, judge him again. If he dares to show his face, shove him into the loo and drown him. The crowd recoiled at the ferocity of her words. She had every reason for fury. Bellatrix, of the House of Black, had driven Neville's parents to madness and left Neville scarred. The wizarding world had no death penalty. Its worst punishment was endless imprisonment. Mrs. Longbottom's wish, in the heat of her grief and rage, was to take the diary to Azkaban, to tear Lord Voldemort's fragment to pieces and watch him burn to ash for what he had done. Dumbledore looked at Mrs. Longbottom and understood that, by comparison with Lord Voldemort's atrocities, these were petty offenses. During the Dark War, countless pureblood families had been shattered. The wizarding world had been devastated. To pursue the petty misdeeds of a cat or a few petrified witches would feel trivial beside that. Still, Dumbledore knew the law as it stood. Ordinary procedures could not reach the deeper culpability, and clinging to a theory about Riddle and Voldemort would drag them into endless bureaucratic wrangling. He took a measured breath and began explaining the legal reasoning to Mrs. Longbottom and the other questioners. Nearby, Rogge spoke quietly with Lucius Malfoy. "There aren't many of us left," Rogge said, scanning the crowd. Only about 100 people stood in the square. Lucius sighed. "It's true. Even though the last war ended with you-know-who's death, we pureblood families took the brunt on both sides. We were the backbone, therefore we suffered the greatest losses." "Sometimes," Rogge said, "I dream that Dumbledore and you-know-who had some sort of agreement." "Agreement?" Lucius looked surprised. He leaned in and lowered his voice. "To use war to purge the purebloods." Rogge's eyes widened at the implication. Lucius continued, quiet and oddly wistful. "Have you been to the Tower of London in August? What about it? Muggles scatter red poppy petals to remember the war dead." Lucius glanced at the sea of people and spoke softly. "At first I didn't know what that sea of red meant. Then a well-dressed Muggle told me that in their World War I, the nobility suffered terribly. Many promising heirs died, whole lines were wiped out, the aristocracy gradually faded." "A frightening precedent," Rogge murmured. "Power doesn't vanish. It simply moves to those who hold it. If we occupy less, others will take our place. Look around. You can still feel the power of pure bloods, but there are fewer of us now than half-bloods and others. If another war comes, how many families will survive?" Lucius's voice tightened as he nodded toward an elderly woman nearby. "That's Miss Muriel Pruitt. Both her brothers died in the war. In a few years, the Pruitt line may be gone." He swallowed. "Perhaps we should rethink how pureblood status is certified." Rogge agreed. The losses from war were irreversible. "You mean change the rules?" "Yes." Lucius's expression was cruelly practical. "Bring Muggle chromosome theory into our registry. If a pureblood marries a Muggle-born witch, then designate his male line descendants as pureblood." "Chromosome theory?" Rogge repeated, puzzled, then made a mental note of the term. "I don't know if that'll fly." Lucius let out a rueful smile. "After Dobby's incident, we can't push too hard. It won't destroy us, but it will be a setback." He thought of the uproar around Riddle's diary and his own role. "Everyone knows I kept Riddle's diary. I almost allowed, nearly brought you-know-who back. A member of the Board of Governors even complained to Dumbledore that I coerced signatures." "You mean that suspension order?" Rogge asked. "Yes." Lucius sounded bitter and helpless. "A director complaining to the headmaster. No school in the world has such a thing." "Uncle Lucius," Rogge began hesitantly, "could the Travis family take a seat on the Board of Governors? There are only 12 seats, perhaps." Lucius considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will contact the board and Dumbledore. We will have the Malfoys withdraw." In truth, no direct intervention was necessary. A letter would do. Lucius did not need to write it himself. When this trial ended, Dumbledore's prestige would rise, and the board would cling to him. If Malfoy resigned first and slipped the Travis family into the vacancy, they could save face and secure future influence. The travails of the moment could preserve long-term advantage. Lucius looked at his son Draco with a flicker of regret. Why had he not sired a clever heir like Rogge? He glanced at Narcissa, thinking if he had a daughter close to Rogge's age, it might bind the families together. Back at the bench, Dumbledore addressed Mrs. Longbottom with calm firmness. "These offenses are sufficient for a trial. Riddle's diary will be destroyed with fiendfire." Mrs. Longbottom's questions had echoed many around the square. Initially, people had been perplexed that Lord Voldemort's charges were limited to the diary's destruction. Dumbledore's patient legal explanation gradually made them understand. No matter how monstrous the crimes, trials must follow proper procedure if justice is to be preserved. Rush to punish everything at once, and they could erode the legal system itself. Worse, they might set loose even more dangerous criminals by trampling due process. Mrs. Longbottom nodded, satisfied. For her, achieving a satisfactory outcome mattered more than the detailed reasoning. As Dumbledore promised the diary's destruction, applause rose and a cheer swept through the crowd. This trial's outcome had felt decided from the beginning. "Albus, I support burning that evil diary with fiendfire," someone called. "Me too." "Ministry, legislate that all dark arts items be destroyed with fiendfire," another shouted. And what about dark wizards? Cough, cuff, that's not possible, Fudge interjected quickly. As the most civilized wizarding community in the world, we cannot employ the equivalent of the Muggle death penalty. We must afford dark wizards basic dignity. Dignity, my arse! Someone from the crowd spat. They didn't think about our dignity when they butchered people. The curse rang out. Fudge's face went crimson. Who said that? Who dared? He raised his wand, furious, but no one came forward to name the speaker. Secret whispers and a few stifled laughs drifted through the crowd. Dumbledore rapped the table to restore order. The trial continues. Tom Riddle's diary, within which a portion of his soul is sealed. 50 years ago, he released the basilisk, murdered innocent girls, and framed his classmates. 50 years later, it attempted to revive, threatening lives. Dumbledore recited the list of crimes slowly, then delivered the verdict in a voice that brooked no argument. Hogwarts will revoke all his honors, including the Special Contribution Award and Outstanding Graduate. The Wizengamot will strip him of wizarding status and all rights. Furthermore, under the International Confederation of Wizards statutes, given the gravity and irredeemable nature of his offenses, I hereby sentence him to destruction by fiend fire, so that no remnant may ever threaten us again. Destroy it, someone cried. Burn it with fiend fire, rose another voice, and then a ripple of wands lifted across the square. The diary hovered in midair. Sensing the surrounding motion, it trembled, a tiny object that suddenly seemed full of danger. Tom, Dumbledore said quietly, the last light in your heart was extinguished 50 years ago. Today you are judged in the name of the law. He raised his wand and aimed at the diary. The diary began to thrash, shaking as if trying to break its bonds. A collective intake of breath ran through the crowd. Parents drew their children close, and many backed away. Some began to apparate, ready to flee at the first sign of catastrophe. Others moved forward instead, wands at the ready for whatever counterattack might come. Lucius. Rogge called the name and lifted his own wand as a reminder. I understand. Lucius Malfoy, who had been frozen, shivered and immediately raised his wand. He knew with a cold certainty that he had lost a Horcrux of Lord Voldemort. If Voldemort returned and discovered a missing diary, the consequences for him and his family would be unimaginable. For his own sake, he had to be seen to stand with Dumbledore, to help destroy the diary and prove the Malfoys' break with the Dark Lord. I pronounce your death, Dumbledore intoned. A low incantation slipped from his lips, and a shaft of crimson flame leapt from his wand. It coalesced into a fiery phoenix, wings outstretched, and swooped toward the suspended diary, refracting the sunlight into a radiant blaze. The bird's long neck curved like a predator closing on its prey. Dumbledore, no, came a cry, but it was swallowed by the burgeoning roar of fiendfire. The diary burst into flame with a scream that made the hair on necks lift. It twisted and writhed, but the enchanted chains held it fast. From the burning paper, a warped, adolescent shape began to rise, the phantom of Tom Riddle, a pale, distorted echo of the boy he had been. He howled and reached as if to escape. People watched with clenched nerves, expecting a last, desperate lunge. Rogge was about to call for more fire when Mrs. Longbottom sent a golden-yellow stream from her wand. Together, Rogge shouted, and his wand answered with a silver-white torrent that took the shape of a crow and darted into the conflagration. Others joined in at once. The square filled with the sound of fiendfire incantations, a terrible, solemn chorus. Colored flames erupted from wand tips and formed creatures, snakes like scorpions, lions, and tigers of living fire, each streaking toward the diary. Rogge closed his eyes and felt the world steeped in flame. In that heat, he felt something like a new clarity. As wizards channeled their words and gestures into spellwork, they were shaping inner energies, emotions, memories, raw elemental force, into forms. For the first time he grasped that magic was not mere rote, it was the sculpting of inner power. He reached out with that understanding and gathered the surging fire essence around him, cool and deliberate. Calmly, he shaped and condensed it until a small fireball sat warm in his palm. Startled, he let it disperse. No one paid him mind. All eyes remained fixed on the center of the square. His palm still tingled with the warmth of something he had conjured, pure fire element, independent of sudden passion. He had no idea how strong it might have been. All around, the fiendfire ravaged the diary. It ate at the 16-year-old remnant of Riddle's soul, which writhed and shrieked. The assembled wizards were not merely burning an evil artifact. They were passing final judgment on a name that had terrorized their world. Hatred and memory fed the flames as everyone present poured their determination into the destruction, intent on denying any future return of that darkness. Harry watched from the edge of the crowd, both hungry to help and frustrated that he had never been taught the Fiendfire curse. He paid attention to the chords of incantation and the hands of those casting, committing their movements to memory. When the diary's phantom shrieked and the flames flared, Harry raised his wand and tried. A flicker became a ball of flame that issued from his wand and took form. A small fiery stag that bounded forward, joining the other Fiendfire beasts in the assault. Snape, standing in the crowd, watched Harry for a moment, then turned his head toward the distant graveyard, a faint, unreadable light in his eyes. Riddle's remnant glared with malevolent fury as the Fiendfire enveloped it. Before it could muster any coherent spell or defense, the conflux of flames condensed into a dragon-like tornado of fire that pierced sky and earth. The phantom was shredded utterly. There was no residue, no curling black ash, only the thunder of flames as they soared upward and formed a vast cloud. Within that boiling mass, fiery beasts danced and fought, tearing at each other in a grotesque parody of the feast below. Rogge watched his crow lunge and tear apart a crimson lion, then swallow it and grow larger for a heartbeat, but with no more fuel, it would only burn out. Dumbledore lifted his wand to prevent the Fiendfire from breaking loose, and a quiet beam of light shot into the fire cloud. The beasts fragmented into countless glittering motes that hung above the square, slowly dimming and drifting like embers put out on a breeze. The sight was terrible and magnificent at once. "Today we have ended a darkness," Dumbledore said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "There may still be other Horcruxes hidden in our world, but as we stand together and press forward, we will overcome them all." Minister Fudge's face betrayed a private disappointment. The fragile peace he'd tried to maintain had been violated by Dumbledore's straightforwardness. Still, the crowd did not rupture into panic. Instead, they erupted into applause, cheers that were less for a politician and more for the truth, that they had a leader and a cause to rally behind. As embers floated out of the cloud, a fresh, fierce energy rose in every chest. "Kill Lord Voldemort! Burn all Horcruxes!" Someone shouted, and after the briefest hesitation, the crowd took it up. For so long, people had feared to speak his name aloud, calling him you-know-who, as if naming him would summon him back. The Fiendfire had not only destroyed the diary, it had burned away the fear that had kept their tongues silent. They found new courage and unity in that blaze, determination not to let his darkness return. This was no longer a private fight between a few people. It was a common war for the entire wizarding world. Together, they would see it through. The wizards sang and laughed, hugging one another, and even breaking into impromptu dances. Cheers rose up when the diary was announced destroyed. Joy and relief found 100 voices. Wands sent up fireworks that bloomed into peculiar shapes, throwing brilliant color across the night sky over Godric's Hollow. People tilted their heads back and watched, drunk with the beauty of the moment and the sense that something terrible had finally been put to rest. "Rogge, it's beautiful," Hermione breathed, tears slipping down her cheeks as she took everything in. He felt the same, something like peace settling over him. "This is the beauty of peace," he said quietly. The wound Voldemort had left on the wizarding world ran deep. Tonight's verdict, this ritual, this public unmasking and destruction, let people draw a long, grateful breath. They could at last say they had judged him and begun to imagine a future. There was still worry, of course, about other Horcruxes, but at least they were confronting the truth instead of pretending it didn't exist. Rogge looked toward the dark stand of trees. The moon had begun to clear the branches, and the lamps along the lane blinked on one by one. "Green, bring out your best wine," someone shouted toward the pub owner. Bearded Green grinned and waved his wand. Barrels clambered out of the cellar and popped their corks. "Who wants to play?" he called, rifling through the pub's sheet music. "I will," a bald wizard declared, setting down his butterbeer and lifting a set of bagpipes. Music spilled into the square. A bonfire was lit at the center. People sat and sang and danced and drank. Those who could fly took brooms into the night and traced bright patterns through the air. Harry sat beside Dumbledore, warm and oddly rooted in a way he had never been before. He felt, more than anything, that he truly belonged. Only by beating Voldemort could they hope for the kind of future they were celebrating. "Rogge, you can play guitar?" Hermione asked, surprised to see him transfigure a branch into a remarkably convincing instrument. "Of course," he said with a small smile. "I learned years ago, supposedly to impress a girl. Turned out girls preferred pianists. Pianos are flashier, take up more space." He chuckled. It was a fond, resigned sound. The memory had the dust and softness of a faded photograph. "Can I request a song?" Hermione's eyes were bright. Rogge hesitated. "I only know one or two tunes." "That'll do." She looked pleased anyway. The square rang with laughter and music, but not everyone joined the revelry. Severus Snape slipped away, moving through the crowd toward the ruins of Harry's former home. The house, battered in the years of war, had been left in its broken state as both memorial and warning. Grass had overtaken the yard. Small creatures skittered away at his approach. Stepping into the remains, a tide of old memories washed over him. More than a decade had passed, and yet every tilt and shadow of the place felt painfully familiar. The upper room was half intact. A crib, a broken lamp, a string of wind chimes. Snape stooped, lifted the chimes, and gave them a small shake. The sound that came was crisp and almost tender. For an instant, a faint smile touched his face. It was gone as quickly as it came. "You still can't forget her, can you?" said a voice behind him, softer than the librarian's usual austere rasp. If anyone at Hogwarts had seen Madame Pince now, they would have been astonished to hear melancholy in her tone. Snape tightened his grip and did not look back. "The first note was a student's prank," he said, the words low as a breeze. "I know." Madame Pince came to stand at the edge of the ruins. From her arms, she produced a little bundle of letters and spread them out like relics. "And the ones after that?" "I'm not worth your waiting," Snape replied, and his voice was colder than he intended. "I am willing." She turned her face toward the dark house, a raw stubbornness in her posture. Then, with a ragged breath, she walked away. He stood very still until the wind moved the chimes and brought him back to himself. If not for that boy's prank, none of this, the letters, the explanations, might ever have been necessary, he thought. The memory made his chest ache. He hung the wind chimes back and, after a long moment, left the ruins for the churchyard. Godric's Hollow Cemetery lay beside the old church, a place of long stones and older names, Peverell, Wright, McLagan, where centuries had collected stories and ghosts. Snape walked the cobbled path between the graves, silver moonlight bleaching the letters on worn tablets. Here the lives of the dead were recorded in epitaphs, some grand, some small, all surrendered to earth. He found Lily's stone easily among the many slabs of white marble. Her epitaph read, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." He let his hand rest on the cool stone. James's grave lay beside hers. He almost ignored it, as he often had in life, and the old loathing he had felt toward James seemed to dim into something more complicated when he thought of them both. "Can time dilute everything?" he murmured to the stones, then pushed the thought away and crouched. He had no flowers. Conjured blooms might be clean and pretty, but they would feel only formal. Instead he spoke, because speaking was what he had left. He told her about Harry at school. Clumsy with potions, brilliant on a broom, clever, impatient, living in echoes of his father. The confession came out unevenly. "I don't know if I should tell you," he said, and then he told her anyway. "Harry's scar, it's been wrong. Albus and I both thought Voldemort's death was not as it should have been. Your magic saved the boy, and he survived, but the circumstances suggest something more, something that looks like a Horcrux ritual." He shook his head. "We've checked everything we can. I'm sorry. Lily, I haven't found a solution." He straightened, and beneath his quiet voice was an iron resolve he would never speak aloud. "Believe me," he said to the empty night, to the woman in the stone, "I will protect Harry." He added, inward and deadly certain, even at the cost of my life. Chapter 187. That tree is of some use. Dumbledore's eyes dimmed as he stared at the tombstone, emotion choking him. A soft wind swept through the graveyard, carrying distant footsteps. He turned without a word and melted into the night like a ghost. He had brought Harry to Godric's Hollow to visit the Potters. Dumbledore paused by a nearby stone, the grave of his sister, Ariana, and for a long moment he simply looked. The moonlight picked out the tired planes of his face. He remembered a long-ago afternoon when he had clasped a man's hand and talked of beautiful ideals, a world where wizards and muggles could live together in peace. Tempted by that vision, Albus had gone with him. Aberforth had refused. Aberforth had sided against Grindelwald, and the three of them had fought. Dumbledore clenched his hands as the memory rose. Had he not pressed so hard, could the tragedy, the accidental death of Ariana, have been avoided? "Professor, is this my parents' grave?" Harry's sorrowful voice cut through the memories. Dumbledore nodded slowly, a deep sadness in his reply. "Yes, Harry, they were both very brave, and they loved you." He looked at Harry with a complicated expression. He understood the hard road that lay before the boy, facing the greatest enemy in the wizarding world, and a dark piece of that enemy still living inside him. Harry did not know of any of this. He only stared at his parents' headstone, pain breaking through, tears flowing. He had never known them. The closest he had were the faded photographs Hagrid had shown him. The people who had loved him most in life were now only stone and memory, and the distance between them felt unbearable. He leaned against the tombstone, dizzy, as though a weary traveler had finally found the embrace of home. After a long while, he calmed a little. With wet tracks on his face, he looked up at Dumbledore. "Professor, can Dobby be buried here?" Dumbledore hesitated. This cemetery was old, and even with all his standing, he could not unilaterally decide to bury a house elf among the residents of Godric's Hollow. "Harry, that would require the consent of the cemetery's trustees," he said gently. Harry's cleverness, sharpened by grief, understood the implication. Despite some recent changes in status, house elves were still considered servants by many wizards. Godric's Hollow, Dumbledore meant, was unlikely to accept one. "Why?" Harry asked, unwilling to let it lie. Dobby had feelings and dignity. He had a life, like any wizard. Aren't all lives equal? Dumbledore's voice was soft as he explained. "It has to do with the history of Godric's Hollow. After the Statute of Secrecy in 1689, wizards withdrew from the Muggle world, and the remaining communities became, in effect, wizarding villages. Some places, Tinworth in Cornwall, Upper Flagley in Yorkshire, Ottery St. Catchpole, grew that way. Godric's Hollow is the most famous. It was the home of Godric Gryffindor himself, who lived here long after he helped found Hogwarts. This graveyard traditionally serves the residents of Godric's Hollow." "I'm sorry, Harry," Dumbledore said. "We can give Dobby a proper funeral, but we must find a more suitable resting place." Harry understood and nodded. Dumbledore smiled faintly. "I can clear a spot on the hill behind Hogwarts." Dobby's funeral was both grand and sorrowful. He was laid to rest on the slope behind the castle. Present were Dumbledore, Harry, a recovering Ron, and a few wizards moved by Dobby's loyalty. The house elves of the castle did not attend. They could not understand why Dobby had betrayed his former masters. Even after he tore out his heart, so his admirers would call it, as the final testament to his freedom and loyalty, many still branded him a traitor. It was a sunny day, gentle light spilling over the hillside, lending a measure of warmth to the farewell. Harry led the ceremony and delivered a heartfelt eulogy, honoring Dobby's bravery and sacrifice. He placed flowers on the grave with a steady, reverent hand. Also buried at the ceremony was Aragog's severed leg. Hagrid stood beside that grave with his eyes wet. Aragog had died under a wizard's spell, and Hagrid had been helpless to act. Most of the acromantula in the Forbidden Forest had been slaughtered. Those that survived were maimed and terrified, hiding in the forest's depths. Hagrid had tried to coax them back, but they wouldn't take a single step toward their old home. On the opposite side of the Black Lake, Daphne had meant to come to the funeral, but stopped when she noticed Rogge sitting and staring toward the hillside. She went to sit with him. "Rogge, aren't you coming?" Daphne asked, curiosity bright in her voice. She didn't see what could hold him so transfixed. "I'm probably the least welcome person at Mr. Saviour's side," Rogge said wryly. He knew his own words had driven Dobby to make choices that changed everything. "Do you see that sapling on the hillside?" Daphne took the glasses he offered and peered. At first, she saw nothing but young growth. Then, finally, she spotted a slender sapling rising among the grass. Where? Oh, there. It's just a sapling. There's nothing strange about that. Trees sprout all the time. That's Professor Quirrell's grave, Rogge said calmly. Daphne, don't scare me. She snatched the glasses off and scanned the slope more closely. Quirrell died, didn't he? Last year he lost his wand to me, Rogge said. After the house cup, I buried the wand there and watered it with unicorn blood. A wand can grow into a tree? Daphne sat up, astonished. Then it could be excellent wandwood someday. She flushed at her own words and sank back, half embarrassed. Rogge, however, saw potential and did not mind the idea. We should go. Exams are coming. If our marks don't improve this year, our house badges will be demoted. Humph, I won't let that happen, Daphne declared, fists clenched. Then she sagged in annoyance. The dean's teaching 2 classes this year. If they still can't find a proper defense against the dark arts professor next year, we'll be ruined. Fortunately, the headmaster has already found someone new, Rogge said, producing a letter and handing it to her. He grinned when she read it. The news was dampened by Daphne's glamour and social ambitions. Your mother joined the Board of Governors. Daphne's hand flew to her chest. Young Master Travis, please watch over this poor little witch, she teased. Look down there. There's the new professor, Rogge said, pointing toward the lower lawns. Lupin? Never heard of him. He won't be another Lockhart, will he? He's 100 times more dangerous than Lockhart, Rogge said with a touch of respect. The board hasn't even formally approved Dumbledore's appointment yet. Why? Daphne frowned. Doesn't the headmaster usually appoint his own staff? Rogge shook his head. Not this time. Chapter 188, Alternative Professor. Because next school year, the Board of Governors is doubling the teaching budget. Old flying brooms, decades-old earplugs, and the like can all be replaced with new ones. Roger explained the basic reasons behind the change. After Easter, Lucius Malfoy had decisively resigned from the board and used his last privilege to recommend Jessica Travis as his replacement. The first thing the Travis family did after joining the board was inject a large sum of money. Faced with gleaming galleons, the other governors immediately welcomed the new director with broad smiles. Without Malfoy to obstruct him, the board no longer restricted Dumbledore's teaching philosophy and supplied generous funding to Hogwarts. Both school and governors were pleased at Malfoy's departure and warmed toward the new benefactor. What troubled Dumbledore, however, was how pointed Mrs. Jessica's remarks had been. She had made it clear that while the board would not interfere with the school's policies, they reserved the right to review any professors Dumbledore appointed to ensure they were qualified. Last meeting, the principal was practically scolded, Roger said with a laugh. No matter how much his mother pressed him, Dumbledore was adamant about appointing Lupin as the new defense against the dark arts professor. Someone actually dared to reprimand Dumbledore? Daphne asked in disbelief. It was Jessica, Roger said. Ever since I started here, she's been complaining it's too dangerous. Every time I go home, she brings it up. This time, with a spot on the board, she took the chance to vent, Roger went on. She blasted our defense against the dark arts teacher as dangerous, a charlatan, completely unfit to be a wizard. Could this Lupin be? Daphne asked. Yes, Roger answered bluntly, careful not to reveal too much. He's not an ordinary wizard. He didn't say Lupin was a werewolf. If that secret reached the wrong ears, Lupin would never have been allowed near Hogwarts. Werewolves are contagious. If bitten, one changes under the moon. If a lycanthrope lost control and attacked students, the consequences would be unimaginable. Jessica had learned Lupin's condition through her son, and at the last board meeting, she explicitly opposed Dumbledore's appointment. Can he teach at night? Jessica had demanded, glaring at Dumbledore. Grateful as she was to the headmaster, she wouldn't let her son be placed with someone infected. Dumbledore had been taken aback. He hadn't expected Jessica to know. Of course he can, he answered firmly. I guarantee the safety of all students with my life. They stared at each other without yielding. The other governors had not anticipated such an explosive first meeting. The Travis family had not only replaced the Malfoys on the board, but had also donated far more money, lending weight to Mrs. Jessica's objections. She was also president of the Magical Chamber of Commerce. Her influence could not be dismissed. Principal, you should know about the curse, she continued. If something goes wrong halfway through the year, will you be able to find someone else to take over? The board has received letters from students saying Professor Snape is exhausted from teaching 2 courses, irritable, even showing signs of depression. Dumbledore blinked. Depression? Snape had seemed happier for a while. He had even been eager to help fill vacancies. The curse is nonsense, Dumbledore said, dismissing the idea. But no professor has gone a full year safely. Lockhart got the worst of it. If the Defense Against the Dark Arts post lacks a steady teacher, who will ensure students pass their 5th-year exams? Who will prepare them to face the darkness ahead? Her words struck a chord. With Voldemort's possible return now a real worry after examining that diary, everyone felt unease. Principal, the board places complete trust in you. In principle, we shouldn't interfere with your choices. But this Mr. Lupin's record is blank, even trusting your recommendation. I trust Lupin, Dumbledore cut in. He will be an excellent professor. He will teach every student well. I give you my word that they will be safe. Dumbledore's confidence was persuasive. Jessica studied his blue eyes and found them steady, but she remained unwilling to have a werewolf teaching her son. Roger's safety was non-negotiable. The room quieted as everyone watched the standoff. Jessica remembered something Roger had mentioned. If there was one person Dumbledore least wanted to confront, it was Grindelwald in Nurmengard. All right, she said, after a long breath, leaning back. Principal, if something does go wrong, may we appoint the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor ourselves? Dumbledore's chest tightened. He looked at her, puzzled by the sudden unease rising inside him. I agree. So do I, murmured another governor, and others followed. They'd been driven half-mad by the argument. Was the fate of the Dada post really worth such a spectacle? Quickly, many voiced support for Jessica's proposal to let the board step in if necessary. Seeing 12 votes fall into line, Dumbledore thought for a moment and then nodded. Very well, Mrs. Jessica. If needed, the board may personally select the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Mrs. Jessica, whom would you recommend? Dumbledore asked, the question on everyone's mind. Rest assured, he will be capable, she said with a confident smile. Even if a curse exists, he will survive it. I'm sure you'll recognize his talent. Dumbledore's unease deepened. If there was any wizard he would consider for such a role, one who could both teach and withstand danger, it would be Gellert Grindelwald, the prisoner of Nurmengard. But Grindelwald was an extremely dangerous dark wizard. How could anyone imagine releasing him? You're playing with fire, Dumbledore said slowly. Jessica's smile barely flickered. Times have changed. His ideas no longer carry the same power. Do you really think that castle can hold him? And what about you playing with fire? Dumbledore countered, leaving her momentarily speechless. After a long pause, he whispered, He won't come out. I know him. The others exchanged bewildered looks, unsure whom they were discussing. At first, none had understood why Jessica so vehemently opposed Lupin, or why Dumbledore reacted so strongly. If you don't choose Lupin, if you pick someone else, Jessica pressed, unwilling to concede. Dumbledore inhaled deeply. I have my reasons for choosing him. It will help us in the fight against Lord Voldemort. Then let us hope the curse has been lifted, Jessica said with a thin smile. With that, she stepped into the fireplace and vanished, the meeting dissolving as suddenly as it had become heated. Chapter 189, Jumping Mushroom. The meeting went on as planned, covering not only Lupin's appointment but also the search for a new professor of care of magical creatures. Professor Kettleburn was due to retire. After the Christmas pageant, he had finished his 63rd year of service and felt satisfied. His professorial career was drawing to a quiet close. At the end of the school year, he would leave Hogwarts, and the school needed someone to take over the creature classes. In his report to the Board of Governors, Dumbledore had strongly and unhesitatingly recommended Hagrid as the only candidate. Hagrid was no longer a criminal. His name had been cleared and his wizarding rights restored, and he could now use his wand openly. But as a half-giant, Hagrid's appointment would meet resistance from the Board of Governors, not entirely for reasons of blood, since Professor Flitwick had goblin ancestry, but because Hagrid had no academic qualifications. All his knowledge of magical creatures came from experience and research in the field. Entrusting a group of students to him, to be expected to handle dangerous beasts, struck many as reckless. That argument might have dragged on longer, if not for a heated exchange between Jessica and Dumbledore that distracted everyone. By the time the meeting had been underway for half a day, everyone was impatient, eager to apparat away. When Dumbledore slid the appointment document across the table, no one bothered to read it. They nodded and agreed as if swept along by habit. "Actually, I think it would be better to invite Mr. Newt to teach us," someone suggested. "Newt Scamander, the expert on magical creatures?" Daphne's eyes lit up. Everyone had heard of him. His name carried weight. Roger frowned, unable to see why Dumbledore wouldn't have chosen Newt. Newt Scamander would have been an ideal teacher. His enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge could ignite a love of magical zoology in students. His book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and his work in Safeguarding Beasts were persuasive in themselves. "What a pity," Roger muttered, displeased but resigned. He only hoped the rest of the third year would pass without further complications. Now Lupin had arrived. Would Sirius Black be far behind? Harry's godfather had been wronged for over a decade. When the Ministry re-examined his case, his appeal had been rejected. Wormtail's lies and his staged death had shifted the blame so completely that no one in the wizarding world would now believe Black's protests. "I've been looking forward to this for a long time," Roger said, gripping his wand and staring at the sky as if he could draw excitement from the clouds. He wished the Dementors were more dangerous. He liked the idea of fighting them. It would make things less dull. The wizards and witches who had attended the funeral had returned to Hogwarts, and Ron looked paler and quieter than usual. Even though Riddle's diary had been destroyed, its influence still lingered. Ron often felt exhausted and listless, his body aching whenever he cast a spell. Madame Pomfrey had told him it was magical overexertion. Ron didn't understand why he was using so much magic. He glanced at Travis with a vague suspicion that whatever had happened was somehow tied to him. "Congratulations on your recovery," Roger said with a smile that would have been harmless if not for how poorly timed it was. Harry and Ron shot him a look and walked away without answering. "They're being ridiculous," Daphne protested on Roger's behalf. "If it weren't for him, the diary wouldn't have been found so quickly." "Forget it," Roger shrugged, disinterested in the argument. Malfoy slid over to them and lowered his voice. "I heard his father's back from the Arctic." "That fast?" Roger was surprised. "It's because of the revised laws. The recent investigations found one of Voldemort's hidden Horcruxes." Draco's face was tight with resentment as he glared at the red-haired group. Arthur had been transferred back to the Ministry after Easter and had even been promoted. The first thing Arthur had done on his return was to search Malfoy Manor and confiscate any dark arts artifacts. Aurors had combed the house with a meticulousness that even reached the basement. Lucius didn't know how the information had leaked, but the Aurors had discovered the manor's secret collection room. Fortunately for Lucius, he had already cleared out most of the incriminating items. "It's unfair," Malfoy went on bitterly. "They act as if Ron's poaching didn't happen, yet his father wins a prize in the profit. There has to be some trickery." Roger patted Draco on the shoulder. "It's only a few galleons. Don't get worked up. Prepare for the Quidditch match instead." "We're really forming a team?" Draco's eyes widened. "Not a house team," Roger said. "A professional team. If I can breed the Golden Snitch, we can apply for a slot with the International Federation. With Newt back in Britain, he can guide me through the breeding," Roger added with an eager grin. "Maybe we'll see little Mr. Malfoy humiliated on the world stage." "Impossible," Draco bristled. "My father will hire the best chaser coach." "A chaser? Aren't you going to be a seeker?" Daphne asked, curious. Draco's jaw set. With Harry around, being seeker would be a shadowed role at best. He had decided, with effort, to give up the seeker position. "No," he said stubbornly. "I'll be a chaser, the best chaser in all of Hogwarts." "Go for it, Mr. Great Chaser," Roger teased and pointed toward Neville. Neville was running toward them, clutching a large red mushroom the size of a wash basin. Neville had long wanted to join the Ravenclaw Magical Society, but his grades made admission difficult. He had to rely on special permission to get in. He chose herbology, his strongest subject, and after nearly a year of studying and steady practice, he had finally built up the courage to challenge the other members of the club. Malfoy had been hostile to Neville since their first year, leaving no shortage of barbs when Neville first tried to join. "Roger, look, I've cultivated a tramp mushroom," Neville announced, breathless, and placed the red fungus before them. "A tramp mushroom?" Daphne reached out and poked the thick cap. It sprang back with a firm bounce. "Exactly." Neville set it on the ground carefully. "It's got a strong rebound. You can jump on it with a light step and go flying. The harder you push down, the higher it springs, maybe even to the top of the castle." Neville's excitement mounted. He hopped onto the mushroom himself. The cap depressed and then shot upward like a trampoline, sending Neville soaring a few feet into the air with a delighted whoop. "Is that mushroom poisonous?" Roger asked, eyeing the bright red cap and pursing his lips. Chapter 190, Neville's Challenge. "How about making mushroom soup with it?" Rogge said, picking up the odd fungus and turning it over in his hand. It had a red cap and a white stem. He squinted at it, wondering what the soup would taste like, and whether drinking it would make him lie down flat. He'd always been curious what it would be like to see little people after eating something like that. If it really was a magic mushroom, would the effect be even stronger? "Completely harmless," Neville declared proudly. He tore off a piece of the mushroom and chewed it with exaggerated relish. "You can't just eat that," Daphne blurted, eyes wide. Neville swallowed and grinned. "It grew from the spores of a red, bouncing mushroom. I collected them from the forest on the night of the full moon, like Professor Sprout taught me. Back then, the spores were full of magic, perfect for cultivating tramp mushrooms. After that, I used sneezing powder to control their growth." "Sneezing powder?" Daphne echoed, puzzled. "Isn't that for pranks?" "It is," Neville said, shrugging, "but I discovered it has a special effect on mushrooms. If you stimulate them with sneezing powder as they grow, they keep shaking and become bouncier. It helps them absorb nutrients better and speeds up their growth." He talked about the process with obvious pride, eyes bright. "I put roots from a nightmare tree into moist soil, scattered the spores on top, and used the sneezing powder just like I planned." Neville's passion for herbology was plain to see. He'd studied plants endlessly and spent hours in the greenhouse. His careful selection and breeding had produced spores that now gave the tramp mushrooms a strong rebound even without any powder. The result was a new variety that could help wizards in all sorts of adventures, and, as Rogge's earlier question suggested, might even be used as food. Malfoy listened to Neville's explanation with a nervous frown. If Neville had real cultivation skill, this challenge would be harder than he'd expected. He felt a prick of unease. He turned to Rogge and Daphne, plotting to bring others into the contest so he wouldn't be the only one to lose. Daphne grinned at Malfoy and teased, "Neville, you planning to take on Malfoy then?" Neville nodded without hesitation. "Rogge, can I challenge Malfoy now?" "Of course," Rogge said. "By the club rules, you have to defeat 4 people to join. Have you chosen who you want to face?" Neville squared his shoulders, summoned his courage, and shouted, "Malfoy!" "I'm not deaf!" Malfoy snapped, scowling. "Let's go to the greenhouse. Let Professor Sprout set the tasks." Neville, impatient, grabbed Malfoy's hand and started pulling him toward the greenhouses. "Wait," Malfoy barked, making Neville stop. "You do remember you have to beat 4 people, don't you?" "If we challenge separately, I'm not going," Neville replied. "But," Neville faltered as he tried to think of other opponents. "There's Anthony, Terry, and who else?" He glanced at Rogge and Daphne and said, firm now, "Hermione." Hermione? The name drew immediate attention. Everyone who heard it looked surprised. Hermione Granger was famously studious and not someone to underestimate. "Yes, Hermione Granger." Neville's voice held a clear determination. "I want to beat Hermione and show everyone I deserve to join the club." Malfoy's expression hardened. Neville's choice felt like a personal slight. "So you're saying I'm not good enough?" he sneered. "Yes," Neville answered bluntly. He admitted it plainly, part pride, part resolve. He wanted to prove himself. In his mind, the toughest in the Ravenclaw society was Rogge. After that, he thought, came Miss Know-It-All herself. He didn't have much confidence about beating Rogge, but he trusted his knowledge of herbology more than Hermione's, and he'd spent so much time in the greenhouse that he figured he had the practical edge. Malfoy let out a low laugh, angry and scornful. So your challenge to me is just personal? Yes! Neville stared at him. You used to bully me a lot. Neville hesitated for a moment, trying to remember the specifics. He fumbled for his memory ball and concentrated. Oh, I remember now. He jabbed a finger at Malfoy. You snatched my memory ball, you tied my leg with a spell and made me hop back to the Great Hall, and the more he listed, the tighter his fists grew, as if he could punch Malfoy through the memory. All right, I accept, Malfoy said, taking a breath. Those things did sound familiar. He hadn't realized how far his pranks had gone. A small part of him even felt a hint of pride. He'd been clever enough to pull them off. He hadn't picked on Neville recently. Had Neville changed? But think carefully, Malfoy warned in a low voice. If you join the club, there will be magical duels. No limits, you know, he added with a cold smile that made Neville's stomach drop. If you get in, I'll pick you as my opponent. At every club meeting, I'll be casting spells at you, and I'm not above using my fists. Ahem, Rogue interjected, frowning. We're a civilized, friendly magic club. We don't fight, we discuss and learn. He gave Malfoy a pointed look as he spoke. Malfoy patted Neville's shoulder in a way that was more threatening than reassuring. I'm not afraid, Neville said, pulling Malfoy along toward the greenhouse. Rogue and Daphne trailed after them, intrigued by Neville's bold challenge. Word spread fast. Other students hurried to the greenhouse, and soon a crowd of little wizards had gathered. Hermione and the others had been alerted by Rogue and came running from their houses too. Though everyone admired Neville's courage, few believed he could beat Hermione. The greenhouse smelled fresh and green. Warm light filtered through the glass, illuminating rows of curious magical plants. Professor Sprout herself was there to supervise. As a leading authority on herbology, she had years of experience cultivating and researching magical flora. She smiled at Neville and the assembled challengers. The rules are simple, she said. You'll each be given a seed of a magical plant to cultivate under my supervision. I will provide the seeds, and you must use your knowledge and skills to grow your plant to a specified stage. She raised her wand, and a planting bench shimmered into being in front of them. Chapter 191, Crazy Girl Luna. The magical planting platform was a marvel of arcane engineering. Created by long-dead craftsmen, it was covered in delicate runes and intricate sigils, a marriage of careful workmanship and deep, practical magic. Its surface was smooth and mirror-like, so clear you could see the soil and roots beneath. Around the edges, the runes flowed into one another, forming patterns that spoke of life, growth, and the hidden logic of the natural world. It can accelerate a seed's development and monitor a plant's condition in real time, Professor Sprout explained, waving her wand. A faint light shot from the tip and the soil in the shallow trench began to stir. When the wand brushed the runes, they glowed softly. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and within moments, a tiny thunderstorm had formed above the platform. By changing your magic, you can make the platform simulate all kinds of weather. Sunny days, steady rain, even hail or storms, so you can create the perfect conditions for a plant, she said, dispersing the clouds so a little magical sun could shine on the damp soil. This is incredible, Rogge said, peering at the workbench, nearly itching to pull it apart and study every piece. The younger students clustered around, equally enthralled. Herbology had never seemed so alive to them. They'd expected a drab, hands-on class, nothing like Transfiguration's spectacle or the precise torment of potions. Here were gloves and dirt and a teaching that felt as much practical as magical. Professor Sprout rapped him gently on the shoulder to rein in his curiosity. Although it's magical, she warned, it's designed for small-scale planting and for advanced study. Sprout was delighted that the planting platform had sparked such interest. Herbology had long suffered for being seen as the least flashy of subjects. Hardly anyone wanted to become an herbologist when a life of waving a wand looked so much easier. She continued, Herbology is both a science and an art. It teaches you the secrets of the natural world and how magic interacts with living things. You can plant your seeds now or take time to gather information first. The seed passed around was smooth and oval, faintly striped in white. Neville recognized it immediately as a luminous begonia seed, a very common plant in the Enchanted Forest. On summer nights, fields of luminous begonias shimmered with fireflies. In June, they grew with astonishing speed and, given ideal conditions, could produce small blue flower buds in as little as 3 days. "I'm planting it," Malfoy declared, slipping on dragon-hide gloves and tucking the seed into fresh soil. Anthony and Terry exchanged looks, unfamiliar with the seed but unwilling to be outdone. They dug, filled a hole, and buried theirs too. Neville frowned. Luminous begonia seeds had hard shells and needed to be softened in rainwater before they could push up through earth. Burying them straight away would slow germination considerably. If he had planted properly and the others hadn't, his begonias might be behind, or possibly already gone by the time theirs sprouted. "I'll go check the reference books," Hermione said, careful as always. She put her seed away. Proud though she was, she would not act rashly. She'd accept Neville's challenge, but only if she had done everything she could to be prepared. "All right, children." Professor Sprout nodded. "The first greenhouse will stay open. I think by the end of the exam, we'll see which of you has done the best work." "Will they grow that fast?" Rogge asked. Sprout smiled but didn't offer a straight answer. "It depends on the knowledge you bring to it. You can sometimes spot them by the forbidden forest on warm nights. They're so common that many herbologists never bothered to record them. There aren't many proper references." It was a hint that Professor Sprout hoped Malfoy and the others would catch. The surrounding students buzzed with comment and speculation. "I think Hermione will win," one said. If Neville hadn't challenged her, he might have joined the Ravenclaw Magical Society. "I've never seen Hermione lose," another put in. "Not always. Remember last year's flying lesson? That didn't go well for her." "Disaster? Oh, please. Has good become another way of saying disaster now? Don't forget, Hermione got O's in everything except flying. If she'd done better in that, Rogge wouldn't be top of the year." The group went quiet. For Hermione, any grade less than an O was a failing mark. That rigid standard made her achievements seem even more formidable. Hearing she had signed up for every elective only added to the awe. "Still," someone said, "Neville's got a chance. He's been working in the greenhouse all year. By the time Hermione finds what she needs, Neville's seeds might already be up." Bet a sickle on it?" another challenged. "Who's scared?" came the reply. Daphne, worried for Hermione, leaned toward Rogge. "Do you think she'll win?" "I don't know," Rogge admitted, "but she's definitely stronger than Malfoy and the others. Look, Neville didn't just bury his seed either." "That proves Hermione's caution pays off," Daphne murmured. "If the seed needs special treatment before planting, Hermione's being smart." Daphne considered the professor's hint. If the luminous begonia was so common that it wasn't well documented, the necessary knowledge might not be in the library at all. "Is the professor telling us some answers can't be found in books?" she whispered to Rogge. Before he could answer, a soft voice asked, "Excuse me, may I join the Ravenclaw Magical Society?" A first-year witch stood beside them. Her dark golden-brown hair framed blue eyes that seemed a little too bright, a face that often looked surprised by the world. She wore radish-shaped earrings and a necklace woven from butterbeer corks. There was something quiet and otherworldly about her. "Loony Luna?" Daphne blurted before she could think, then flushed. "I mean, your necklace is very interesting." "It's a charm," Luna said, lifting the cork necklace for Daphne to see, which only made Daphne more embarrassed. She leaned toward Rogge and hissed, "She's a bit odd. Everyone calls her Loony." Rogge shrugged. "Used to ward off Nargles? You know?" Luna's face brightened. No one at Hogwarts took Nargles seriously, but Luna's eyes lit up as if Rogge had spoken a secret the rest of the castle had forgotten. Chapter 192. College Cup? What? "I heard about the necklace's function from others," Rogge explained quickly. "I understand." Luna nodded as if she'd overheard people teasing her. "I believe in the existence of crumple-horned snorkacs," Luna said. "The great wizard Elegug was found in a place called Snorkak Village in the south. He was unknowingly hooked by a snorkak and died 3 days later." "Mistletoe," Luna whispered dreamily. "They live inside mistletoe." Daphne felt a chill run over her. They were in a greenhouse. Mistletoe could be nearby. No wonder everyone called Luna Loony, Daphne thought. "Maybe you should catch a snorkak and show it to the magical world," Rogge suggested. Then everyone would understand how dangerous mistletoe is and steer clear of it. He smirked at the thought of romantic moments gone wrong. Harry Potter under the mistletoe, Cedric had he not died, or a Snorkack suddenly emerging. None of it predictable. The Ravenclaw Magical Society's admission requirements are simple, Rogge continued. All subjects from the previous year must be no lower than E, and at least one must be O. Of course, the Society can grant a special admission if you're exceptionally skilled in a particular subject. Flying class is excluded, he added for emphasis. That doesn't sound hard. As a Ravenclaw, Luna was confident she could meet the requirements. She shrugged. Intuition, she said when Rogge asked why she wanted to join. What? Daphne stared. It was a very Luna answer. Rogge smiled. The Ravenclaw Magical Society doesn't refuse anyone. Watching Luna drift away, Rogge murmured to Daphne, Your two names sound alike. They're nothing alike, Daphne protested. My name stands for laurel and victory. Hers stands for the moon and instability. The moon's waxing and waning affect the tides of the whole earth, and Luna's name carried that airy, confused connotation. When you met Luna, the name felt perfectly apt. She didn't care if others borrowed her textbooks or hid her shoes as a joke. Lost things will always come back to us in time, she would say. She spoke like a philosopher, or like someone who believed in creatures that didn't exist, crump-lahorned snorkacks among them. Daphne didn't doubt Ravenclaw's scholarship. Anthony and Terry from the Society were endless diggers into odd knowledge, lost continents like Mu, Atlantis, Lemuria, or whether other civilized beings besides goblins lived underground. When Rogge mentioned that Muggles had walked on the moon, Anthony and Terry hunted down Muggle moon landing footage. They dragged a projector to school. It promptly became wreckage under the castle's magic. Luna was different, eccentric and unpredictable, which left her with almost no friends. If she dressed normally and didn't talk so strangely, people might not reject such a beautiful, odd girl. The Greenhouse Challenge gave everyone something to relax about before exams. Students checked the greenhouse daily to see whose seeds sprouted first. Neville's seeds had already pushed up tender shoots. Malfoy and his cronies' seeds remained stubbornly whole. Anxious, Malfoy couldn't wait and dug his seeds up to inspect them. He cracked one open in front of Professor Sprout, then hastily put it back. "Draco, you're damaging them," Sprout said, frowning. Such rough treatment should have earned a severe point deduction. "But I saw it in a book." Malfoy brandished a torn page at her. He held his breath, worried Rogge might find out he'd ripped a Muggle book. While Professor Sprout examined the page, Malfoy slipped away. Hermione, unsurprisingly, had been researching nonstop. She barely slept or ate, paging through a mountain of books and finding nothing. During Wednesday's astronomy class, she was peering through a telescope when she suddenly shouted, "I saw it!" "Saw what?" Rogge asked. "The seeds Professor Sprout gave us." Hermione handed the telescope to Rogge and pointed toward the forbidden forest. On a summer night, the forest shimmered with specks of light. Through the lens, beyond ordinary fireflies, was a luminous plant with blue flower buds. "I remember it from a book." Hermione dug out a small booklet titled Odds and Ends of Magical Gardens. In a tiny corner was a short note. "Luminous begonia, grows in clumps after rain, blooms in 7 days, a riot of luminescence, suitable for summer cultivation." Hermione, flushed with excitement, jumped up, then blushed and apologized to Professor Aurora. "I'm sorry, Professor. Gryffindor, -5 points." Professor Aurora shook her head and reminded the class to keep observing the night sky. Harry and Ron stifled laughter. Hermione's enthusiasm had cost them a few house points, but Gryffindor was still leading the school. The small lions glanced at Hermione with quiet encouragement. "Don't worry, we're ahead anyway." Slytherin, by contrast, had lost its edge. Under Rogge's leadership, the house had grown complacent. Members stopped participating in class and answered carelessly. Professor Snape tried every trick to boost their morale by awarding points, but as soon as he did, the students would break rules and have points docked again. He realized they were doing it intentionally. House points? What are those? The little snakes no longer cared about the house cup. If you don't care, you won't be disappointed at year's end. By the end of the year, Slytherin hadn't gained a single point. Instead, they owed an enormous number, and their hourglass was empty. Some students worried this looked like a challenge to the headmaster's authority. Marcus and other prefects confronted Rogge. Are we being disrespectful to the headmaster by doing this? Marcus asked. Huh? What did we do? Rogge replied. We study hard and try to improve. Have we missed homework or slacked in class? As for points, that's the professor's business. What does it have to do with us? Marcus, I don't see a problem, Draco said from the side. Last year we tried so hard and the House Cup still went to Gryffindor. It's already predetermined anyway. Why bother? Draco snapped, smoldering. Ahem, what predetermined? They earned it properly. Rogge patted him, warning him to be careful with his words. If we're not as good, we have to admit the gap, Rogge sneered. What's our score now? 35, Marcus sighed. He had never seen a number that low. Excellent work. Isn't that a new record? Rogge gave a cold smile. Slytherin should focus on strength, not empty reputations. Our priority is the end-of-year exams. Make sure our grades completely crush Gryffindor's. If we do that, who needs the House Cup to prove anything? Chapter 193, Dumbledore's Proposal. Roger's suggestion made everyone's eyes light up. The House Cup wasn't just an honor or a rotating trophy. It represented everyone's effort and the reputation of a house. Last year's last-minute point additions had crushed Slytherin's hopes and left the house feeling defeated. Roger proposed a response. If Slytherin thoroughly trounced Gryffindor in every way this year, especially in exam results, and the cup still went to Gryffindor, then it would prove the House Cup was worthless. The Slytherins took the idea to heart. They wanted, with irrefutable results, to show everyone that Slytherin was the best. Meanwhile, Hermione had found a cultivation clue in a gardening manual. Luminous begonia seeds grew fast if soaked in rainwater. After class, she hurried to the greenhouse and set up a planting table, using magic to conjure dark clouds, lightning, and thunder. Rain fell into the hollow she'd prepared, and the seeds were submerged. Their hard shells softened after soaking. She covered them with soil, hoping they would sprout soon. Before leaving, she glanced at Neville's seeds. They already had thin leaves unfurling. Neville would surely win this round. Hermione felt deflated and sat alone in the courtyard, thinking. Roger was called to the office by Dumbledore and saw her there, looking gloomy. He walked over. What's wrong? You look out of sorts. Nothing. Hermione lowered her head, sullen. Am I unlikable? She looked up, her voice trembling. Does Professor Sprout have a bias against me? Roger was taken aback. Hermione had been cheerful in astronomy class, and Professor Sprout was known to be kind. Why would she single Hermione out? Why would she target you? Roger said quickly. Everyone knows the only teacher who makes things difficult is Snape. If Professor Sprout had told us what kind of seeds they were, I wouldn't have fallen behind, Hermione said, turning away. Her eyes glistened. Roger understood at once. Hermione felt the contest was unfair. Neville had spent so much time in the greenhouse that he knew the seeds and the cultivation method. Others had to research or take a gamble. Well, looking at it that way, maybe Professor Sprout should have been more helpful. But you weren't beaten. You figured out how to cultivate luminous begonia by researching. And Neville spent a year learning this, Hermione muttered. You're clever in every subject, Roger said, patting her shoulder. He's good at herbology, but you're strong across the board. Hermione nodded, a little comforted. She'd only been briefly discouraged. She'd long since ceased being the awkward muggle-born who'd arrived at Hogwarts uncertain of herself. Her talent had been recognized by everyone, and as vice president of the Ravenclaw Magical Society, she was respected even among some purebloods. Losing to Neville hurt for a moment. That was all. It's almost curfew. Where are you off to? The Forbidden Forest? Roger teased. Hermione's face flushed. No, the principal sent a portrait to summon me late at night. I don't know what it's about. House points? Roger guessed. Then he should be looking for the Dean or Marcus. Hermione rolled her eyes. Their meddling had already warped the House Cup's meaning. Hey, Miss Granger, that's slander. Roger pretended to be offended and made her laugh. Good luck on your exams. Don't let me beat you, Mr. President. Roger's heart was a little nervous as he reached the office. Professors and prefects were already gathered. Even Harry and Ron were there. He slipped in and said, Sorry I'm late. Sit down, Dumbledore said with a smile. He spoke matter-of-factly. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is in the girls' lavatory on the third floor, and we must deal with the basilisk. Logically, a rooster's crow could stop it, but I am considering whether we might use this as a way to test everyone's learning. Let students challenge the basilisk? Professor McGonagall's expression was grave. That's far too dangerous. There could be casualties. I think it is most suitable, Snape said, looking toward Roger and the other students. Students with poor marks need not count themselves in. After all, some cannot even remember a simple recipe, like Potter. Snape's tone carried a sneer. Potter, you forgot to add belladonna to your potion last time. It smelt worse than a sewer. If you went to face the basilisk, would you even remember the spell? Harry flushed with anger. Snape's barbs were more vicious than Lockhart's buffoonery. Why was he still a teacher? Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout exchanged worried looks. The idea was a rare practical opportunity, but it was risky. The wizarding world had learned that peace was fragile, and things like Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes lurked in the dark. What about its eyes and venom? Both Flitwick and Sprout asked. Dumbledore answered calmly. Fawkes can help. He can peck out the basilisk's visible eye, and his tears can heal those poisoned by its venom. Fawkes chirped from his perch as if to endorse the plan, and the last of their objections eased. There must be a professor supervising at all times, McGonagall added. Dumbledore looked at the prefects, the outstanding students chosen to represent each house. Prefects, what say you? You represent your houses. Principal, I fully support this, Percy said quickly, his ambition plain. He saw how excelling in such a challenge would help his standing. Me too, other prefects chimed in. Excitement ran through the room. The chance to prove themselves and earn bragging rights, even a line on their future resumes, appealed to them. With Dumbledore's assurances and Fawkes present, the danger seemed manageable. Marcus glanced secretly at Roger. This plan didn't conflict with their house cup scheme. Dumbledore nodded. I will post a notice to the whole school. Everyone will be given a chance to face the basilisk. Also, there have been some unexpected developments with the house points this year. Roger's face fell. Hermione had guessed right earlier. Heads turned towards Slytherin and then to Roger. He looked at Marcus. Is that what you call sneaking a peek? Slytherin's house points are currently in the negative, Dumbledore continued. A situation we have never seen before. After careful consideration, I have decided to allow the professors to award points based on performance in the Basilisk Challenge. If your students perform exceptionally, Slytherin will have an opportunity to win the House Cup. Really? Marcus couldn't help an exclamation, then composed himself into an embarrassed smile. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff prefects brightened as well. Without major changes, the cup seemed destined for Gryffindor, but Dumbledore's words gave them fresh hope. Slytherin's decision to lie flat this year had made Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff rethink whether the cup was fair. If their deans were anything like Snape, a last-minute surge of points could snatch victory away even from a house that had led all year. Sympathy for Slytherin echoed around the room. I disagree. Roger's voice cut through the murmurs. A sudden stir followed. He'd been building a case all year. If the House Cup's outcome could be overturned like this, why should he cooperate? Chapter 194. With full force, Dumbledore had sensed Slytherin's intentions from the start. They wanted to undermine the House Cup by manipulating the scoring. That would not only make students question the value of house points, it would weaken the school's authority. A Gryffindor victory would lose its meaning and become an indelible embarrassment. As principal, he would be accused of bias, of adding points whenever it suited him. Rogge rose to his feet, speaking with a hard, righteous tone. House points are earned through day-to-day study. If a basilisk challenge can suddenly swing the standings, how is that fair? Fair? Percy answered first, bristling. A basilisk challenge shows magical ability. Professors evaluate the results like an exam. Those who perform well should get more points. Those who don't should work harder. Magic isn't only dueling, Rogge shot back. There's astronomy, history of magic, herbology, and so many other subjects. By your logic, anything not fight-related is useless. Percy faltered. That wasn't what he'd meant to say, but Rogge didn't give him a chance. If we judge house standings only by combat and spells, Rogge went on, we strip the rest of their meaning. Is that really Hogwarts' educational philosophy? The room fell quiet as everyone considered the implication. Rogge's words hit a nerve. If the cup could be decided by a single spectacular test, ordinary students would be reduced to spectators. Their daily learning would seem meaningless beside the feats of a few geniuses. Snape cleared his throat, a brief warning. He was not only Slytherin's shadow prefect, but also the son of a member of the Board of Governors. If this argument reached his mother, Jessica, the next governor's meeting could become explosive. Rogge, however, was not deterred. "Take potions," he said dismissively. "Do any of you think you're better than me at it?" A ripple of indignation ran through the prefects. They were all top students in their houses. None would accept being dismissed so easily, especially not by someone only in his second year. Even so, Snape's smile betrayed agreement. Rogge's talent in potions was exceptional. "Rogge could sit his NUTs now," Snape observed half proudly. "Many of you might never even take that exam." Rogge pushed further. "And as for a basilisk, I faced poachers attacking a thunderbird last year. What about you? Have you ever faced anything like that?" "If the rules allow basilisk challenges to decide everything," Rogge continued, "then those of you standing here would be left with no chance. Why bother competing at all? Let Slytherin keep the cup and save us the trouble." His words hung in the air like a gauntlet. They exposed a brutal truth about prestige and power. When a few exceptional students could dominate by spectacle, the rest were sidelined. Rogge's tone softened, but his purpose stayed sharp. He wasn't trying to belittle everyone. He wanted to check what he saw as Dumbledore's arbitrary power, adding or deducting points on a whim. "Dumbledore is the head of this school," Rogge said quietly. "He should be impartial. Rewards and punishments handed out without clear rules breed resentment. If the principal can change the result whenever he likes, how is that fair to any house? Harry Potter shouldn't win because he's the savior. That sets a bad precedent. If the rules are a ball of yarn, everyone should be able to see how it's knotted." Dumbledore listened, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles. Then he applauded, a soft sound that broke the tension. A few scattered claps followed. "You spoke very well," he admitted. "I withdraw my proposal and apologize." He nodded as if accepting the lesson. Whether genius or ordinary, every student is part of this school. To place them in rigid tiers based on a single metric was an oversight. "But the house point system is problematic," he added, throwing the issue back. "The principal and the professors can, in practice, grant or remove points based on mood." Rogge's remark wasn't aimed solely at Dumbledore. He had in mind Snape, McGonagall, and others who had, at times, awarded points in fits of temper. It might feel satisfying, but such capriciousness shredded trust between the houses. "Why?" Rogge asked. "Had the other houses not come to Gryffindor's aid last year?" There were reasons, perceived slights, old grievances, that rules could prevent. "What we need," Rogge said, meeting Dumbledore's gaze, "is a clear set of rules. How many points for being late, how many for answering in class, caps on additions and deductions, and a deadline. No last-minute massive swings in points right before the cup is awarded." He looked at Harry and the others. The reference to last year was obvious. If the House Cup remained, loopholes had to be closed. "I agree," Marcus blurted. "How did you get so many points last year? That wasn't fair." "That was because we defeated Lord Voldemort," Ron snapped back. "Our points were earned." Chapter 195, College Regulations. "Oh, why don't you explain in more detail? Post it so everyone can see the exact procedure," Rogge said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If I remember correctly, you got 60 points for a game of chess. What, did you crush Lord Voldemort with a chessboard?" Rogge's words were like knives, shredding the shaky logic behind the bonus points. 60 points, 70, 100. It might as well be glued to Harry's head that the House Cup belonged to Gryffindor. The professors in the room found themselves at a loss. The challenges they'd used to award points suddenly looked childish and arbitrary. If the details were published, claiming they were the sorts of trials that stopped Voldemort would make the whole school look ridiculous. Some people, when they've clearly taken advantage, should just hide their tails and stop embarrassing themselves. Rogge sneered. "Our house's points are negative this year. What rule says that's forbidden?" Weasley, If you think the House Cup is guaranteed, why don't we start with the first years and meticulously review everyone's scores, one by one, he added. You dare? Weasley's face flushed. He ground his teeth, the words, "Go ahead, check," trapped in his throat. Even if Snape habitually handed out deductions, that was nothing compared to Dumbledore's late point bolstering. Weasley's confidence wavered. 60 points for a chess game. Was that really justified? The other professors exchanged looks. This was a headache. Rogge's accusation landed where no one could easily answer. The school hadn't followed its own rules. For a moment, Dumbledore's office felt like Rogge's staging ground. No one interrupted. Rogge sniffed and looked at Weasley with open disdain. He'd taken the rewards, but had the gall to publicly claim them as earned. My suggestion, Rogge continued coolly, is to standardize the house point system and introduce clear regulations. That way Slytherin won't be in the red next year. Dumbledore considered a moment and then nodded. I think that's a good idea. As for the basilisk, the school will distribute appropriate rewards based on everyone's performance. The meeting ended anticlimactically, but everyone's impression of Rogge had shifted. Dumbledore's proposal had been meant to placate Slytherin to stop them feeling the system was biased. No one expected Rogge to seize the moment and press the point so forcefully. He had become an archer who had been drawing his bow all year. Now the arrow flew and hit its mark, applying real pressure. Rogge's stance wasn't only his, he represented Slytherin's collective grievance. If fairness couldn't be guaranteed, why should anyone invest in house points or the House Cup? If Slytherin opted out, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff might follow, and the House Cup would become a farce. Dumbledore sighed and rubbed his temples. Rogge had drafted a House Point System Regulations document, incorporating feedback from the houses. It outlined how Hogwarts points would be earned and deducted, with an emphasis on fairness and transparency. Points could be earned through classroom performance, quality of assignments, participation in school activities, house duels, displays of magical talent, and so on, open to all students. This would exclude last year's kind of ad hoc adventures. Under the new rules, many of Harry and his friends' points would not have existed. Crucially, a single award or penalty would be capped between -50 and 50 points to prevent extreme swings and curb arbitrary windfalls. Even defeating Voldemort or resurrecting Merlin couldn't generate runaway bonus points. All point changes would be governed by clear rules, recorded and archived, so students could inspect their house point history at any time. Points would be used strictly to measure a house's annual standing. Extraordinary contributions to the school or the wizarding world could still be recognized with other honors. The document was detailed, covering many contingencies to root out bias and favoritism. With Snape's habit of arbitrary deductions in mind, the other houses secretly loved the idea. Many wanted to slap the regulations on his door right then. The proposal had already been widely discussed and approved across the school. Dumbledore only needed to sign. He picked up his quill and signed. When the students cheered, Dumbledore felt, perhaps belatedly, that this should have been done sooner. At least now Snape's deductions would be constrained. As for adding points, well, no one trusted that would completely stop. Dumbledore felt a pang of regret, though. When Harry first arrived at Hogwarts, the one thing he had excelled at was flying. He bore the title of savior, but his academic record wasn't stellar. He'd always seemed a little unsure of himself. Those last-minute points had changed everything, turning the tide and giving Harry the confidence to keep going. On reflection, Dumbledore would make the same choice again. He would award those points to let Gryffindor win the cup. This year, Gryffindor had defended the House Cup fairly. No one contested it. The question, now, was whether Gryffindor could hold on to that edge under the new system. Nobody could say. But seeing the ambitious young Slytherins filled with resolve, Dumbledore knew they would do everything in their power to win the cup next year. On the train ride back, the conversation buzzed about the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. Many students had confronted the blind giant. Some had barely escaped its bite. The Ravenclaw Magical Society, it seemed, had performed best. Facing the basilisk, they showed no fear. Spells precise and fast, every member composed under pressure. Many longed to join that calm, capable group, but then they remembered their grades and felt discouraged. Hey, I've got 2 Lily of the Valley badges. You only have 1, Malfoy taunted Neville, proudly flashing his badge. Neville had clearly won the herbology challenge. His luminous begonia was splendid, rightly earning first place. Hermione's plant had bloomed too, but later and smaller. Malfoy's seed had only just sprouted, which surprised Professor Sprout. She hadn't expected Muggle gardening tactics to help so much. You haven't graduated yet. Maybe your badge will turn silver, Neville said, tearing apart a tramp mushroom he held. The mushroom's top was tough and elastic, but flip it over and it came apart like a biscuit. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Malfoy pounded his chest and swore it wouldn't change. While they bickered, everyone's attention kept drifting to the piece of basilisk meat Rogge held. Rogge had taken the Gryffindor sword into the chamber and actually managed to cut off a chunk. If the professors hadn't intervened, he might have slaughtered the whole thing. The poor basilisk, blinded and reduced to hunting by sound, was now under Snape's care in the chamber to recover and would be used as a teaching specimen when term resumed. Rogge, will it be all right to eat? Anthony asked as he pulled out his cauldron. Terry set it over the fire, and Theodore used aguamenti to add water. A few girls busied themselves preparing other ingredients. Everyone looked on, curious and a little horrified. Would basilisk meat be edible? What would a cauldron hot pot of basilisk taste like? We'll know if it's edible once we try it. Rogge's shrug drew curious looks from everyone around the cramped table. The basilisk's flesh was surprisingly elastic and still shimmered faintly with residual magic. There was no venom left. Rogge set the slab on the table and waved his wand, slicing it into pieces as thin as cicada wings. You could see the vein patterns running through each slice as clearly as if they were translucently paper thin. Can we really eat that? Neville asked, eyes fixed on the plates. Probably, Malfoy answered, a thread of doubt in his voice that didn't stop his excitement. We'll only know once we try it. Malfoy's family had dabbled in the illicit trade of magical creatures, supplying odd ingredients to the wizarding world. Using magical beasts as food was rare. Most were ugly or smelled foul, and many had intelligence that made eating them morally questionable. A troll, for instance, was out of the question. The basilisk was different, though. Hatched from a rooster's egg, it didn't carry the same taboo. So when Rogge produced it, none of them objected. The cauldron bubbled quickly. Neville hurriedly tossed in the tramp mushrooms. They're fresh, perfect for the broth, he said. Rogge stirred with his wand, and rich mushroom scents spread, making everyone lean forward. Won't the school notice we're cooking in a cauldron? If Professor Snape finds out. Susan's voice wobbled as she watched the bubbling pot. We're on holiday, Daphne said, pulling a bowl from somewhere and clutching a spoon like a talisman. And we're on the train. Professor can't reach us. How about we leave the basilisk meat until last? Theodore said. He wasn't worried about discipline, but he was hesitant about the meat. He nudged Hermione with his eyes. Vice President, do the books say anything about how basilisk tastes? Could it make you ill? Hermione shook her head. I'd wager it tastes like chicken. It hatched from a chicken's egg, after all. I tested it. It's not poisonous, Rogge added and held the plate up for emphasis. But we should wait a little. Hesitation leads nowhere, he declared, and slid the meat into the bubbling broth. The mushrooms tumbled and softened, releasing a mellow, earthy perfume. When Rogge eased the basilisk slices into the cauldron, they soaked up the hot liquid and began to color, turning golden at the edges. The broth thickened into a lacquer of shimmering amber goodness, the smell warming into something smoky and utterly tempting. The mushrooms softened to velvet, the meat crispened slightly while staying springy inside. Everything in the pot looked and smelled like an invitation. Rogge ladled out a slice and held it up, still pausing, despite already insisting it was safe. The cafeteria door banged open, and Marcus wandered in, instantly flinging a casual smile at the spread. His eyes went straight to the plate, and, without ceremony, he snatched a slice. Don't, Hermione started. It's only a few slices. Miss Granger, don't be stingy. I'll buy you candy when school starts, Marcus said, and popped the meat into his mouth. Heat and flavor washed over him. He closed his eyes. Delicious, just a touch bland, he said, reaching for more. Rogge stopped him from taking too much at once. What does it taste like? Someone asked. Hard to tell with so little, Marcus mumbled around another bite. He chewed enthusiastically. It's really good. Tastes a bit like chicken, but what? Hermione prompted, already moving a quill to record his impressions. It's a bit tough, has a nice chew. Rogge, what is this? The mushrooms are springy too. I'll tell my mum to make this all the time. Snake meat, Rogge said. Marcus froze, eyes widening. He brought a hand to his mouth, trying to spit out the slice. The thought of snakes, slimy, fork-tongued, made his face drain of color. Why didn't you say earlier? You were too quick, Rogge replied calmly, and then took a cautious bite himself. The first impression was chicken-like, but with an unusual elastic chew that kept the flavor lingering. Magic in the meat seemed to open all his taste buds at once. The tramp mushroom broth and cauldron cooking gave the whole thing a smoky, complex sweetness that made him close his eyes and savor it. See? Like chicken, Rogge said. Other hands dipped in. Daphne's smile grew as she spooned hot, tender mushrooms and broth into her bowl. One by one they tasted, eyes half closed at the pleasant surprise of it. Watching Marcus's pale, panicked face, Daphne couldn't help but nudge the truth. Rogge was pulling your leg, she said. I mean, where would you find a snake that big? At that, Marcus straightened a little, relief flooding him, until Neville, muffled by a mouthful of mushroom, added, not snake, basilisk. Marcus's eyes bulged. The room seemed to tilt. He went pale and then he fainted. We're fine, Hermione observed, pen still poised. He just scared himself. Malfoy, unperturbed, tipped the second plate of basilisk slices into the cauldron and stirred as the broth darkened and deepened, the train rocking gently as the pot steamed and the group settled in to eat. Chapter 197, Cola Plan. Seeing Rogue eating with 2 wooden sticks, Malfoy quickly transfigured a pair to match him. The stew in the cauldron was intoxicating. Its flavor would not only become an everlasting memory, but seemed to knot their friendship more tightly together. It's really good. After term starts, I'm going to get some basilisk meat, Malfoy declared, wiping his forehead with exaggerated relish. Don't be ridiculous. Daphne cut in mercilessly, then took another sip of the mushroom soup. You'd only win that bet if you actually knocked out a basilisk. Malfoy rolled his eyes and looked at Rogue. Head boy, do you even know how to raise a basilisk? Rogue's eyes widened. He noticed Susan quietly ladling a large bowlful. What are you planning? Of course to kill it for the ingredients, Malfoy said eagerly. Paired with Neville's mushrooms, it would be a real delicacy. If we sold it, we'd make a fortune. Heh, how do you propose dealing with the basilisk's eyes? Looking at them will kill you. At that, Malfoy's grin faltered. If Fawkes hadn't pecked the basilisk's eyes out, who would dare confront it? Rogue finished his soup and leaned back with a contented sigh. So comfortable, he murmured. If only I had a phoenix, Malfoy said, an echo of what everyone was thinking. Who in the magical world wouldn't want Fawkes? Or you could breed a creature specifically for food, Hermione said thoughtfully. The cauldron hot pot had put everyone in a practical mood. Malfoy nodded, mentally filing away Hermione's suggestion. The Malfoy household, like many old families, was always looking for new ventures. They ate until the bottom of the pot was scraped clean, then lingered, chatting about summer plans. Rogue, can I visit your family's manor this summer? Malfoy asked, rubbing his full belly. Of course, but aren't you supposed to be training for Quidditch? Oh, right, I must become the best chaser, Malfoy sighed. What about you? Building another house, someone asked. I still have to finish building, Rogue said. The others blinked in confusion. The Travis family had already finished their manor last year. What could there still be to build? Not my family's house. Our house, Rogue clarified. Oh, that, Daphne said, hugging Hermione closer. The Board of Governors is funding renovations for our house. Why only yours? Hermione asked. Blame Slytherin and Riddle, Daphne answered. Even though the Chamber of Secrets wasn't technically in our house, no one can guarantee there aren't other hidden rooms. And Riddle was a Slytherin. The governors worry he might have stashed dark artifacts in the house. So what's the plan for the reconstruction? Hermione asked. You'll have to ask him. He's had the designs drawn up, Daphne said, indicating Rogue. A tower, like Ravenclaw's. No more living in dark, that cramped basements, Rogue said proudly, patting his stomach. Goblins will supply the materials, house elves will do the building. Headmaster Dumbledore and the head of House Snape will oversee things to make sure there are no more strange secret rooms. I'm so jealous, Anthony said, looking at Rogue. I heard you even have single rooms. Our house still looks like it did centuries ago. I'm really not used to it. Same here, others chimed in, and conversation drifted to the different dorms and comforts from house to house. When Rogue started talking about Muggle life, the automatic devices and odd conveniences, everyone at first disbelieved him, then grew wildly curious. Toasters? Electric toothbrushes? Tell us more, Hermione, they demanded. It's really nothing special. They're common, Hermione said, delighted to explain. She described devices that played music and computers that could send messages to the other side of the world. Email, the lot of it. Eyes widened all around. But they use electricity, someone pointed out. That's clunky compared to our magic. We can learn from them and then adapt, Rogue said, pulling a small magical camera from his bag. Muggles already have color photographs. Our portraits are still stuck in black and white. If I don't have anything else to do this summer, I might upgrade them. And as for the price, why not double it? Rogue suggested with a grin, which drew scowls and amused looks from the others. Don't look at me like that. You can do it too, he continued. The idea caught on. They were reluctant to admit it, but Muggle technology held obvious business opportunities. For proud wizarding families, the thought was uncomfortable, like a noble discovering a farmer had outdone him in some way. But the potential profit was hard to ignore. Making money isn't shameful, Rogue said. Muggles have a drink called cola that's very popular. If we could recreate it with magical ingredients, it would sell well in the wizarding world. Are you serious? He asked, looking around with the camera still in hand. Cola's terrible for your teeth, Hermione scolded. My parents never let me drink it. Too much will make you fat. Then I'll research it myself, Malfoy said, undeterred. Head boy, could it actually make money? I'll try, Theodore offered. The Knott family's finances were strained, and Theodore, good at potions, saw a chance. Even if tinkering with Muggle inventions felt a little undignified, he needed the money. His potion skills meant adapting a Muggle drink would be doable. He could even pair drinks with the most popular wizarding foods to make something new. Of course, Rogue said, drinks can be sold in the magical world and to Muggles too. As long as we keep the recipe secret, Muggles won't know it's made with magical herbs and a little charm. If you can pull it off, the Travis family will invest and help with ministry contacts, Rogue added, sitting up straighter. We can get you the approvals. Theodore's voice was firm. I can do it. Rogue looked around the table. How about this? Everyone takes on a project. Projects. They were intrigued. Pick a Muggle object and make a magical version of it, Rogue proposed. We can't rely on our families forever. We can earn our own money. But I don't know what to pick, Neville murmured. How about hair growth grass? Rogue suggested. Lots of British Muggle men go bald. Something like that would sell. Okay, Neville said, brightening at the idea. With Rogue and Hermione guiding them, everyone found a direction. The Muggle world suddenly seemed full of inspiration. Some inventions were simple, but some were brilliant in ways wizards hadn't imagined. So by Rogue's suggestion, the Cola Project was officially launched. On the Hogwarts Express, a group of young people quietly set a new engine in motion. Whether they knew it or not, their plans could reshape parts of the magical world. Chapter 198, Delacour Manor. Summer break had started, and Jessica hadn't forgotten to pick up her son. When Rogue climbed out of the car, she swept him into a hug and planted a loud kiss on his cheek. Good son, you must help your mother, she said with a smile, shepherding him toward the car. Rogue frowned. Huh? What's going on? Barbara invited the family to France, Jessica replied, evasive about the real reason. In truth, Corvus VI was gravely ill and had summoned a number of relatives to Lestrange affairs. Jessica, after all, had Lestrange blood running in her veins. Corvus wanted familiar faces about when the matter of succession was discussed. Decades ago, Corvus IV had sent his children to America. Lita, irritated by her baby brother's crying, had once swapped him with another infant. No one could have guessed the ship would hit an iceberg. Corvus IV's son was lost at sea. Years later, a boy raised in the United States returned to Europe and discovered that he was Aberforth's son. Albus Dumbledore's nephew, meaning the Lestranges had essentially no legitimate male heir. Leda, born of an illicit affair, had never been openly acknowledged by the family. The scandal had tainted the Lestrange name and had never been forgiven. Really? Rogue remained skeptical. How could your mother lie? Jessica said, blinking as if the question were absurd. Besides, I promised Newt I'd look after the golden snitch. The Scamander family is going? Rogue cut in. Wait, the Scamanders? Jessica laughed. Rogue grabbed her hand, sensing a gap in the story. Jessica sighed and told him the truth in a more blunt fashion. Corvus Vissix is dying. The Lestrange inheritance is enormous, lands and manors in Africa and South America. Everyone, even distant relatives, wants a piece. Logically, I have a claim. By the time it reaches me, it'll be small, but if Barbara hadn't invited us, I wouldn't have gone at all. Then why would the Scamanders be involved? Rogue asked, confused. Leda, Corvus IV's daughter, married Theseus Scamander. Theseus is Newt's brother, Jessica explained. So the Scamanders are interwoven with the Lestrange line. Rogue rubbed his temple. Wizarding family trees might as well be noble houses in miniature. Jessica continued, trying to make the knots straight. Your grandfather and Leda were cousins. They fled to Britain during the war. Corvus VI doesn't have a son, so Leda could stake a claim. Count it out. She's essentially your great-aunt. Theseus would be your great-uncle, and Newt is related by marriage as well. Why do I feel like I'm being insulted? Rogue muttered. Technically, Corvus V's line should have passed elsewhere, but Jessica's voice grew tight. She spoke then of the old scandal. Corvus IV had stolen another man's wife, Lorena Kama, and Leda's illegitimate birth had been a family disgrace. Leda had even attended Hogwarts. Jessica added, oddly, that she remembered the school's head taught her. After Grindelwald's imprisonment, Leda returned to Britain with Theseus. You might even see Newt, Jessica whispered, leaning close. Aunt Barbara said Leda and Newt had a history. Rogue scrolled his handheld, trying to sort the web of ties. Lestrange, Dumbledore, Bouth, Scamander. He gave up on mapping it all and packed his things. When his mother led him to the fireplace and called for green flames, they flew to the Delacour family estate in France. Barbara was waiting on the doorstep. She hugged Jessica warmly and then appraised Rogue. Welcome to France, Jessica, and how tall your son has gotten. Barbara had an obvious fondness for noting heights. She drew Fleur over and compared the two. He's in his second year? At this rate, he'll outrun Fleur by 6th year. Rogue glanced at Fleur, whose English was no better than his French, and she quietly translated. Jessica wiped at an imaginary speck of dust from his shoulder with theatrical scorn. Barbara, your little elves look dreadfully lazy. There's dust everywhere. Oh, they've been very busy, Barbara said with a shrug. A big family to run. Delacour work to do. We're wizards, Jessica sniffed. A little dust is nothing. Clever fingers and a charm, and it's gone. Barbara laughed and led them inside. The manor was an extraordinary blend of gardens, antique stonework, and a proud wizarding tower. French wizarding culture infused every room. Tricolor hats, old protest banners, and a large magical painting of the storming of the Bastille that made Jessica's eyes widen. Barbara gestured them into a magnificent salon whose Baroque furnishings glittered with gilded inlays. One chair, she announced with a flourish, had once been a favorite of the Sun King. Near a shadowed corner stood an ornate European cello. A preserved goblin finger, pale and jabbed through a peasant of jade, hung from its strings, an heirloom of fearsome provenance. The family liked its rarities. Rogue, is it true your Patronus is a raven? Barbara asked, her eyes alight as though she'd sighted something priceless. My son is so gifted, he can cast a Patronus already. Why would I lie? Jessica beamed with pride. They toured the study next. Wall after wall of rare volumes, manuscripts by the famed French scholar Jacques de Molay, and venerable documents of French wizarding history. Rogue's gaze lingered on the shelves. There were things here he'd coveted for years. He knew his aunt was only being hospitable, but it didn't stop him from admiring. Jessica felt a little squeezed by all the grandeur. The carved sculptures, landscape paintings, folding fans, and porcelain made her own house feel nouveau riche by comparison. She vowed, inwardly, to acquire some antiquities when she went back. There were dealers who would trade Muggle funds for genuine pieces. A little Muggle money could buy a lot of show. Her eyes landed on the girl at Barbara's side. Speaking of Patronuses, she asked, casual but sharp, can Fleur conjure one now? Chapter 199. An engagement? As expected of Avila, Fleur was even more beautiful than she had been last year. When Jessica's question reached her, she bowed her head and said, "Not yet." "Oh, that's fine. These things can't be rushed." Jessica gave Barbara a triumphant look, like a child who'd won a prize. "You should ask my son about it. Expecto Patronum is very simple." She nudged Rogge forward. "Come on, son. Show us your Patronus." Rogge's face tightened. He felt like he had been pushed to the front of a family gathering to perform. But under his mother's expectant stare, he reluctantly obliged. Expecto Patronum. He flicked his wand, and a silver light leapt from the tip. A silver raven burst forth and flew around the room, glinting in the chandelier light. "It's actually a raven." Barbara's eyes lit up, and she ignored Jessica's delighted smile. "Jessica, it really seems the Lestrange bloodline has the upper hand. You must help me with the inheritance this time." She grabbed Jessica's arm, eyes sparkling with excitement. Rogge drifted to the study and pulled a book off the shelf. It was written in French. He could make out only fragments. He'd always known that if he wanted to study European magic seriously, he needed to learn French. France was still the cultural heart of European magic, no matter how many families claimed Roman or other ancient lineages. Everyone liked to trace themselves back to some great empire, but the center of magical learning was here, and that meant French. He put the book down and walked back into the sitting room. "What did Barbara say?" he asked. "Barbara says if we help, she'll give us 30% of the Lestrange inheritance when she gets it," Jessica answered. "Only 30%?" Rogge repeated. "Well, she originally said she'd give us the family magic books, since you don't want them." Jessica shrugged. "No, don't." Rogge hurried over and helped his mother into a chair. "We're family. Help if you can." "I knew you liked collecting books," Jessica said with a smirk. "Tell me, did you take the books from our manor? How is that stealing?" Rogge's cheeks warmed as he opened a folding fan and fanned himself, embarrassed. "Why do I hear Alexander saying the Muggle library in Russia caught fire?" Barbara asked. "I was saving the books, protecting human heritage," Jessica replied. "Wouldn't it be a pity to leave such precious knowledge in Muggle hands?" "Saving books? You're just a niffler," Barbara scoffed. "You've gathered so many books. How many have you actually read? They're just gathering dust." "I haven't read them all yet, but I will." Rogge tried to sound casual. "So what help do you need from us?" Jessica pulled him close and whispered, "You get engaged to Fleur." "What?" Rogge was stunned. Fleur was beautiful, but his mother was not bargaining his life for an inheritance. "Is this just because my Patronus is a raven?" "Of course," Jessica said flatly. "And because of your Lestrange blood. Corvus 6 wants a pureblood heir. Pure blood means the right lineage, and a raven Patronus. Apart from that woman Lita, who else fits the bill?" Jessica softened a little. "If you really don't want to do it, you can at least teach Fleur to cast Expecto Patronum." Rogge breathed out a long, shaky breath. "You scared me. I knew you wouldn't be keen. Are you thinking of that witch from your school?" Jessica prodded. "No, not at all." Rogge's face flushed in a way that made him uncomfortable. He had noticed Jessica didn't think much of Hermione, but this felt like a conversation held too early. "Fleur's waiting outside," Jessica said. "She's taking you to get a suit fitted. Old Kivas is hosting a banquet tonight." "Got it," Rogge said, still reeling at the idea of learning Expecto Patronum in one afternoon. Jessica watched him go with a tired sigh. "Expecto Patronum isn't easy to learn. Even if he manages it, it might not be a raven," Barbara murmured, puzzled as to why Jessica had revealed so much. "If you didn't tell him, he wouldn't understand the French anyway," Jessica said. "We could fool old Kevis for now and call it off later. That's my son. I can't bear to trick him." Jessica glared at Barbara, and Barbara fell silent. On the Champs-Élysées, Fleur led Rogge into a century-old tailor shop called Rydell. She kept her head down, barely daring to look back at him. Rogge still hadn't told her he'd refused Barbara's proposal. The moment they stepped inside, the scent of old-world luxury wrapped around them. Ornate golden lamps cast warm light, walls were lined with sumptuous men's formal wear, and crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. An elderly tailor was finishing a fitting on a customer whose suit could have come from a portrait of French aristocracy. "Hello," We need a formal suit for a banquet, Fleur told the shop assistant. A family formal banquet? Rydell can make anything. The balding young shop assistant waved his wand, and a flurry of fabrics and designs appeared. He eyed Rogge appraisingly. Oh, sir, you have a very good build. He ran the tape measure over Rogge's frame and exclaimed with theatrical appreciation, it's rare to see such a robust body on a wizard. Rogge shivered. This tailor's manner was oddly familiar in its bluntness. Fleur, should we try another shop? He whispered. Fleur smiled and leaned close. This is the best tailor in all of France. The assistant overheard them and switched to English with a thick French accent. You are from Britain? Yes. Rogge nodded, trying to follow the accent. I've heard of Madame Malkin's in Diagon Alley. Honestly, British style, like British food, needs seasoning. The assistant's tone was sharp enough to remind Rogge of Professor Snape. He had that same cutting edge. A noble's formal wear should include a long coat, waistcoat, and trousers. I recommend a long coat, double-breasted with golden buttons, the assistant advised. All right. Rogge stood as the man measured him like a mannequin. How about a high-collared shirt? No tie, an ornate jabot instead. A ruffled neck thing? Rogge grimaced. I don't want that. Rococo style? I'm a British wizard. I don't need to look that overwrought. Then you truly aren't suited to such ornate attire, the assistant said with a small, approving shrug. Rogge quickly agreed and chose a deep blue velvet for the suit, rich and restrained. The cuffs and collar were embroidered with delicate gold thread to add a touch of grandeur. Rydell paired it with a matching silk bow tie, a black top hat, and a trimmed cape for formal occasions. After several fittings and tiny adjustments, the outfit was finished. Over a dozen pieces, large and small, all impeccably made. When it was finally done, Rogge felt as if he'd been standing for hours. His legs were numb and his head buzzing from the attention. Rogge examined himself in the mirror. The suit made him look unusually aristocratic. Rich fabrics, a cut that made his shoulders broader and his posture sharper. He frowned. It was a touch too showy for his taste. The shop assistant circled him twice, pleased. Rydell tailors had dressed many wizards. Even a descendant of the Sun King would find it difficult to achieve such an effect. What concerned the assistant, however, was whether the customer could afford it. Sir, that will be 300 galleons. 300? Rogge's eyes widened. He'd expected a high price, but not that high for a single suit. The assistant, reading the look on his face, smiled and handed over a gilded price list. These are our standard rates. We do not overcharge just because you are a British wizard. Rogge skimmed the list. The assistant was right. This was the normal price. Fleur had already reached for her money pouch. As the assistant moved to take it, Rogge stopped him. He could rely on his looks, but he refused to be treated like charity. No, he muttered, then tossed the pouch to the assistant. I didn't realize living in France was so expensive. Is this suit a fixed size? He asked. Of course not. The assistant tugged his collar with pride. Rydell Tailors does bespoke work. We never use magic to alter a fit. We believe in the hand of a skilled tailor. Only in such a suit can one truly shine at a banquet. Rogge snorted inwardly. The design, materials, and finish were exquisite, but commissioning a single-use, custom-made suit for someone still growing felt extravagant. As he thought this, Fleur surprised him. Rogge, you don't need to pay for it, she said, handing him the pouch. Consider it tuition, she added. Rogge paused, then took the pouch. Tuition? He echoed. Fleur blinked, puzzled. He grinned. I'll teach you expecto patronum, he said. Once you know it, Aunt Barbara won't be able to rope me into that inheritance dispute. But my mother, Fleur began, then faltered. No buts. Expecto patronum is not impossible. Rogge eyed the busy Champs-Élysées. Too many muggles. Not the place for magic. Is there a park nearby? I'll teach you now. You'll have it before the dinner. Luxembourg Gardens in the 6th, Fleur offered. When Rogge nodded, she led the way. They walked beneath the plane trees. Sunlight dappled across the path. Sculptures and fountains dotted the lawns. A small replica of the Statue of Liberty stood by a pond. Rogge stopped in front of it and muttered, Is that the real one? Fleur gave him a blank look and stayed silent on that question. They moved to the small lake. Rogge cast a muggle-repelling charm along the path to keep noses out and prevent a scene. Expecto Patronum is advanced, he began, but if your emotions are strong enough, you can produce it. In Britain, It's used mostly to repel dementors. When you cast, you must concentrate absolutely and call up your happiest memory. Happy memory? Fleur's lips curved. Rogue judged the change in her expression a good sign. Very well. Take out your wand and close your eyes. Gather all your attention on that memory. Fleur's face grew complicated, joy tinged with a shadow of something else. She closed her eyes and reached for the memory, letting it fill her. Rogue's voice was calm and precise, guiding her to let the feeling wash over her. A warmth rose through Fleur, and her hand lifted the wand almost by itself. A thin, silvery light sprang from its tip. Rogue's eyes brightened. Her talent was stronger than he'd expected. Most witches and wizards struggled for weeks to manifest so much as a wisp, but the power of happy recollection mattered. If someone's life held few joys, the spell would falter. Good, he encouraged. Hold it. Don't let it go. Strengthen the feeling and cast. Fleur breathed the incantation softly. The light swelled, then pop, vanished like a soap bubble. It broke? Rogue frowned. Fleur bit her lip, ashamed. Did I fail? It's a partial success. Try again. They repeated the attempts. Each time the silvery glow blossomed and then blew out before forming properly. Rogue watched closely, ruling out faulty technique. Your wand work and speech are fine. The interruptions aren't coming from you externally. He frowned, thinking through what could stop a Patronus. Have you ever used dark magic to kill someone? Never. Fleur shook her head vehemently. Rogue considered other causes. Could it be your memory? Tell me what you were thinking of. Fleur nodded and told him. My happiest memory is when my father took me to a Muggle amusement park. The rides were new and thrilling. I laughed with him. It was perfect. Rogue's interest sharpened. And then, we were found by my mother and taken home, Fleur said, her smile paling. I didn't go again after I started school. Father worked late and had to look after Gabrielle, and Mother wouldn't let me go. Aunt Barbara is strict, Rogue murmured. He realized why Fleur's Patronus had repeatedly failed. The joyous memory was short and immediately overlaid by Barbara's presence, by worry and restraint, so the feeling could not sustain the spell. How about making a new happy memory, he suggested. We can go to an amusement park. Your emotions will be fuller. Really? Fleur looked up, surprised and hopeful. Do you think it would work? It's worth trying, Rogue said. Emotions shape magical outcomes. A new, strong experience might give you what you need. But that old park is gone, Fleur fretted. And I'll look childish going now. Then go somewhere more grown up, Rogue replied. Less childish, just a good, vivid memory. Fleur asked some muggles in the park, and to her delight, learned of a new Disneyland in Marne-la-Vallée. She and Rogue exchanged a quick look. If they were going to create a new memory, they might as well do it properly.